censorship. So they're
So you're saying, hold on, employees. So Twitter employees based in China have concerns with the censorship that Twitter's doing.
yeah, they had it's showing screenshots that a few employees from China were expressing concerns over the trajectory of censorship back then, around the time the president was getting ready to be suspended. Yes. So these correspondences were taking place on Thursday, January 7th of 2021. And this is what those correspondences said. Maybe because I'm from China, I deeply understand how censorship can destroy the public conversation. Then the response looks like redacted from the person. I understand this fear, but I also think it's important to understand the censorship by a government is very different than censorship of the government. The First Amendment of the U.S. and similar legislation in other countries with similar concepts exists specifically to prevent the government from silencing the people. And then the Chinese employee at the time responds, I respect that, but realistically, we impose far stricter rules on effectively everyone else on this platform. We started restricting his tweets when they became a threat to democracy. So this is, again, just another rebuttal to this Chinese employee, and seemed like that was our red line. Yesterday, he clearly attempted to overthrow our democratic system of government and showed no signs of remorse. Again, these are follow-up correspondences between Twitter employees at the time on January 7th, guys. If this is not a clear reason to suspend him again as an unhinged ruler attempting to subvert the most powerful democracy in the world, I'm not sure what would be. Shrug. Interesting.
Harrison, what's your take? I know you've been going through the drops since the first drop we had. What's your take on after what we saw a couple of days ago and what we're seeing right now?
So first off, I just want to say welcome back to Brian. I'm glad you got your account restored. It's good to see you back. I thought your thread on your theory of raising Twitter stock price to get Elon to buy Twitter was hilarious. So good job with that. But ultimately, with this drop and all the other drops, it kind of feels like more of what we already knew. It's kind of concerning that we're seeing people that grew up in communist China censor or be worried about Twitter censoring just because it's such an overbearing thing. I know with their censorship of the president, clearly they were just looking for any excuse to shoot the ban on him. I was kind of predicting to my friends prior to January 6th, even as soon as he's out of office, they were going to ban him. Kind of just a prediction I was thinking on early on. And then once January 6th happened, I'm like, they're going to ban him within the next week. I'm pretty sure of it. And that's ultimately what happened.
Yeah, it just seems that they're trying. At first, it's going to become a meme where you've got someone based in China, referencing Chinese censorship when they're referring to the concerns they have with Twitter's way of censoring content. So that for me is is pretty laughable. Brian, what are your thoughts, man? First, welcome back to Twitter. Good to have you back. I think you got your account back 2 days ago. But would love your take on the drop we're seeing now, especially that resistance we're seeing within the company.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, for that. Yeah, we got our account back late on Saturday night. But yeah, I mean, I was never a fan for them banning Trump. I think that I don't see any government involvement. If I saw that, then that's a whole other story. But I don't have a problem with them banning Trump. I do have a problem with him banning Trump. I think he, as a leader of the United States, he had a right to his voice. If it happened after he was no longer president and they were to do this along the lines that they held others accountable, then I wouldn't have a problem with that either, though.
Yeah, I'm just going through the drop right now. I'm just going through what Barry's writing. I'm going through the tweet. For anyone that had just joined, you can see it above. You can see all the whole correspondence. I think she's just setting out the context. So this is the last drop in a series focusing on censorship of a lot of conservatives and the censorship of Trump and his cabinet. So you can go through, see the tweet above. Anything else drop yet, Stephen, or still pretty quiet?
Yes. Yeah, there's a few more here. So number 10, quote, we have to do the right thing and ban this account, end quote, said one staffer. It's, quote, pretty obvious he's going to try to thread the needle of incitement without violating the rules, end quote, said another. And then number 11 says, in the early afternoon of January 8th, the Washington Post published a letter signed by over 300 Twitter employees to Jack Dorsey, demanding Trump's ban. Quote, we must examine Twitter's complicity in what President-elect Biden has rightfully termed an insurrection, end quote. And then there is also another screenshot here of two former Twitter staffers corresponding on January 8th. And the first message says that last sentence, we have to do the right thing and ban this account. And for whatever reason, that is stated 3 times in a row. The response is, we don't have a good track record of acting on his account, except in the clearest and most explicit cases. And even then, to which the response was, in my opinion, extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary leadership. It took 3 years, but I've lost faith. Donald Trump, Republican Party 46, looks like it looks like the final official tally voter count someone put at that time on there. And then the final message on that correspondence is screenshot is, second this, it's pretty obvious he's going to try to thread the needle of incitement while not violating the rules. So a lot of projection there, a lot of assumption, and that's where you can really see the stain of internal bias there. So people are just kind of reading.
So this is what happened. This is what happens when there's no systems in place. I think we talked a lot about it a couple of days ago. There's more tweets.
Yes.
She's so quick. Where are we up to? Which number are we up to?
I think we're up
13.
to 12 now, or 13. Yeah. So
oh
I don't
shit,
know.
we're up to. There's even 15. She's very quick in posting them.
Yeah. So Mario, however you want to do this, I mean, I can keep rapid firing these, or we can, read some out and then
let's go through them. It's like reading an article. Yeah. So let's go 12 and 13. But the Twitter staff assigned to evaluate tweets quickly concluded that Trump had not violated. We're up to okay. In the early afternoon of January 8th, the Washington Post published an open letter signed by over 300 Twitter employees to CEO Jack Dorsey demanding Trump's ban. So you've got people, a lot of pressure around Jack, and it proves that Jack knew of the ban of Trump, or that people wanted to ban Trump. So I think Jack is complicit based on what Barry's saying here. We must examine Twitter's complicity in what President-elect Biden has rightly determined insurrection. I think, Steve, you read this already, but it's all good.
It's okay.
So number 12, but the Twitter staff assigned to evaluate tweets quickly concluded that Trump had not violated Twitter's policies. Quote, I think we'd have a hard time saying this is incitement, wrote one staffer. Okay. So they concluded that Trump did not violate the policies. Let's see what happens next. Quote, it's pretty clear he's saying the American patriots are the ones who voted for him, not the terrorists. And then brackets, we can call them that, right? About calling them patriots, I think, from Wednesday. Okay. Number 14. So they're debating. Oh, yes. Oh, shit. Yeah. So
calling them terrorists. Yeah.
Okay. So it just shows how extreme, like their bias is having significant impact on the decisions being made by Twitter over their systems, and it further proves the bias. Let's see how far this goes. All right, number 14, another staffer agreed, quote, don't see the incitement angle here. So maybe they disagree with what Trump is doing in general, but what they're saying is that on Twitter, like if you look at the Ayatollah, for example, Ayatollah is doing horrible things. I think most of us agree, a lot of things we disagree with as a society. off of Twitter. But Twitter's like, yeah, but he's not breaching our policies on Twitter. In Trump's case, it seems that what's happening off Twitter, and if anyone wants to disagree with me, feel free to do so as I keep reading. What's happening off Twitter is having an impact on the decisions being made within Twitter. So number 14, another staffer agreed. Don't see the incitement angle here. And then we've got dialogue here between Anika and an employee. Their name is hidden. I see XXX has pinged us to ask about incitement for the DJT tweet and wants to see if we can align. So they're messaging, trying to see, like they're facing a lot of pressure. They're facing a lot of confusion. I'm not sure how much to blame them. I was talking to someone who has worked, and we'll try to get them on this.
I have to interrupt you, Mario. I don't know. This whole take on like that they're going off of things outside of Twitter, I have to completely disagree, like 100%. They're going off of things that he was tweeting, and that's exactly what they blamed him being suspended on. And no one knew really what it was until his account was reinstated, and we all can see his last tweets.
No, so I think you misunderstood what I think
you disagree with that.
No, I think you're disagreeing because you misunderstood what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that they're not allowed to do this. Their decisions should be made on what happens on Twitter. So they disagree with Trump in general. They don't like him. They don't like they don't like conservatives. Exactly. They're all on the left. So yeah, so I think you'll agree with me. What I'm saying is that, and I'm kind of confirming this is not right. They're going after what Trump does, says, believes, etc., off of Twitter, which has nothing to do with Twitter's policies. And they're making decisions accordingly because they don't like it.
But then you're saying you don't know if you can blame them. Well, then who would you blame? Who would you blame?
So the second point I was making, so that's the first point. The second point I was saying is, I don't know how many, because there's a lot of employees at Twitter. There's thousands of employees. There are specific ones that intentionally went over the systems they have in place. And we've gone through these names over the last few days. And I think those people, of course, you can blame them because they've broken Twitter's policies and they've placed pressure on Jack, and they've even tried to circumvent things that Jack said. I remember there was one thing where Jack was saying something, employees were referring to it, and then one of the guys, I'm not good with names, says that no, I don't think that's what he means. So they're going over what Jack says in Twitter's policies. Now, there's thousands of employees. I wouldn't put all the employees in that one basket, though. There's some of them that were disagreeing with some of the decisions. Others were just, following as herd mentality. If the boss says so, the boss says so. So I think there's specific employees that are responsible, and I think we've gone through their names. I think you guys might remember their names more than I. And we're seeing here, like, for example, one employee based in China was trying to disagree with that decision, as Stephen mentioned. Before I keep reading them, I see Catherine and Tim with your hands up, guys. Go ahead.
I think we should keep reading them because they're coming out as live. Like, I think we should keep going through it.
All right, let me do that now. We're up to number 11, I think. Where are we up to? No, we're past that.
No, we're up to 15.
No, there's like 3 more now.
19.
We're up to 15, yeah. So I'm up to 15. Quote, I'm also not seeing clear or coded incitement in the DJT tweet, wrote Anika Navaroli, a Twitter policy official. I'll respond in the elections channel and say that our team has assessed and found no violations for the DJT one. Okay, so you've got here Anika saying that she doesn't see a violation within that tweet. 16, she does just that. Quote, as an FYI, safety has assessed the DJT tweet above and determined that there is no violation of our policies at this time. So you're seeing people within Twitter. By the way, Tara, I'm not looking at the speaker request, so I'll let you manage that. We're seeing people within Twitter just say, like, there's no breach of policies. So it'll be interesting to see where the resistance comes in. Later, Navaroli would testify to the White House January 6th committee. Quote, for months I had been begging and anticipating and attempting to raise the reality that if we made no intervention into what I saw occurring, people were going to die. Okay. So based on this quote here, she's saying in the committee that they intervened because of their beliefs, their concerns of people dying. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah,
So they're actually just actually bought into fear, so they're actually worried about this. This is where they're coming from. It might be irrational, but where they're coming from.
That was later. That was later in the January 6th committee. Later, they talked about that, but prior, if you notice, it clearly says that there's no violations of the Donald J. Trump tweets. So There was no incitement to violence or any of that.
Yeah. So
And
based on
then
the
later
I
they
agree.
say they were worried that people were going to die.
Yeah, I agree. So based on the tweets, Tim, what I'm seeing here, their correspondence, they're not talking about people dying. They're just saying, I don't agree or I disagree. But then later in the committee on January 6th, they're like, hey, we were worried about people dying. I'm not sure whether that's true or not. We haven't seen hundreds and hundreds of messages, but based on the messages that Barry shared, it doesn't look like that's the case. And then we go to number 18. Next, Twitter's safety team decides that Trump's 7:44 a.m. ET tweet is also not in violation. They are unequivocal. Quote, it's clear that no violation is just to say that he's not attending the inauguration. So again, it just shows that there is no, the Twitter team themselves are confirming in writing that there is no violation. And then we go to number 19. To understand Twitter's decision to ban Trump, we must consider how Twitter deals with other heads of state and political leaders, including in Iran, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. So based on what I'm seeing here is that there are people within Twitter that are resisting, and they're saying that there is no breach. Trump hasn't breached the policies with his tweets. So it'll be interesting to see where that pivot happened and why the ban still took place. Tim, I'll let you go, and then I'll go to Catherine.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you have an unelected technocracy here, which is kind of similar to like the deep state as a bureaucracy or the corporate management class. This is essentially the corporate management class being really worried about public pressure. And there's no law protecting public speech on social media. So they're actually just caving to this pressure, and they're conforming to that outside pressure because they have no ethical code guiding their actions. And this basically, to me, this shows the risks of a one-party system, because essentially almost all the people in the social media companies at this point have a really entrenched institutional background, mostly on the left. So you have an issue there where you have groupthink that doesn't have any ethical framework or law to prevent them from silencing public discourse out of trying to conform to virtue, and this is the right thing to do. It's like they're ignorant to behavioral psychology. And it shows
Not just that they're
people,
biased, Tim. There was clear bias. Over 98% of Twitter employees donated to the Democratic Party. Like, we cannot be in denial about the truth behind that. So there was clear bias. It wasn't just outside pressure. There was complete bias by employees within Twitter.
I'm in total agreement about that. I think you're interpreting what I'm saying as being adversarial to your perspective.
No, I'm just saying it needs to be clear that there was 98%, over 98%, almost 99% of employees of Twitter were donating directly to Democrats. So there was clear bias. It wasn't pressure. This comment of pressure from the outside, it's almost like a cop-out. I don't know. I think there needs to be reality here. Like, no, this was a very biased decision from within.
From is this outside pressure is where their views are coming from. That's what I'm saying. As in, most people in institutions are conformists. So what
so what the point you're making is like kind of similar to what I said earlier, is that what you mean by outside pressure is not people from the outside pressuring them and that they're kind of forced to do it. By the way, there's new drops I'll read in a bit. But what you're saying is that they should be sticking to their policies. Their policies should never be influenced by anything outside of Twitter. Their policies apply to Twitter. And what happened is that their bias, which is their political stance, which comes from outside of Twitter, is having impact on their decisions within Twitter and Twitter's code of conduct and algorithm. Is that what you mean, or did I misunderstand?
That's exactly what I mean. What I'm saying, because
again, I'll let you. I'll give you the mic again, man. I'll give you the mic. You'll speak while I finish your point. I will. I promise. I promise. I'll go to number 20 just for the audience.
It was a little complex.
You're good, man. You're good.
And all I mean is that
Tim, I'll let you. I'm just gonna read the two drops and I'll give you the mic again. 2 seconds.
Yeah. Sure. Oh, okay.
Number 20 in June 2018. So now we're comparing to Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. For anyone that doesn't know, highly recommend you look him up, and you'll understand why this is a bit funny. All right. So in June 2018, he tweeted, quote, Israel is a malignant cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen. Again, that was a user on Twitter. So Twitter should not be bound by geographical boundaries. Obviously, there's legal requirements in different countries. So if you compare this tweet, whether you like or don't like what Trump said, compared to what the Ayatollah said. I'm going to read it again because this to show you how imagine Trump or any president tweeting this in the US. Quote, Israel is a malignant cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. Continues, it is possible and it will happen. Twitter neither deleted the tweet nor banned Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Yeah, so they keep an authoritarian ruler who says he wants to eradicate all of Israel, and they don't have a problem taking that down. Yet they take Trump's thing down, and we're gonna we have to recognize that there's a huge bias here.
They have multiple terrorists as well. There's multiple.
I think the issue is more that Twitter didn't have a coherent policy in dealing with this. They weren't ready for a leader to question an election or perhaps spark. I don't want to say spark an insurrection because we don't have all the details right now, but they weren't ready for a leader to take these steps. And you see that in these messages that they are basically running around crazy, like trying to figure out what can we do, what shouldn't we do. And
there was nothing predicative of that happening. So for them to try to sit there and act like that was going to happen or predict it happening or look for it and look for any reason to ban Trump, that's the issue. There was nothing indicative of him actually asking for an insurrection or any of that. Nothing.
Yeah. No. I'm not supporting their decision here. I'm just saying that I think it's less a bias and more of a company in disarray at a time when they're taking heat from all sides.
Here's the thing. They have had experience with it. During when the 1997 Tiananmen Square event happened, the anniversary, the 10-year anniversary or 20-year anniversary was coming up. They knew myself, Kyle Bass, the Communist Party knows who we are. They don't like us. They don't want us posting on social platforms. We both had a bunch of our followers and I had my whole account suspended for the week leading up to the Tiananmen Square anniversary and 2 days thereafter. And then boom, they give it back to me. No reasoning, nothing. And they've done this a lot with China way before any of this Trump stuff. So they did have experience with it. Whether or not we have those files yet, they definitely did.
So I think it's important to recognize here that the actions they're taking are generally regarding U.S. Policy and politics, and they don't seem to care about the same things they say they care about when it comes to international issues and human rights issues abroad. So this is a clear bias of what they are triggered and afraid of is influencing their actions, because they're actually responding to their own emotions and preferences in their actions, as opposed to having a clear policy framework that's based on human rights.
But why would they?
We'll continue the discussion, guys. I'm just going to read the drops. Tom, I'm just going to send you a co-host invite as well to join us as a co-host because it gives us another space. Perfect. Now we have a space to bring in a speaker. Good to have you, Tom. Did you read before I continue? Tom, did you hear the comparison to what the Ayatollah tweeted?
I did.
That's crazy, man.
What's going on here is a continuation of what we saw indicated the other night. They had no good faith basis to remove Trump. You had these anti-Trump activists throughout Twitter who opposed him for, reasons that they have a right to oppose him over. But you can't let your political ideology get in the way of managing a site like this. And that's what they did. They picked Trump for suspension based on politics, not based on rules violations. And in doing so and suggesting otherwise, they were lying to regulators, shareholders, users in Congress, and the whole world. And so this was a political hit on Trump, and it had nothing to do with inciting violence, because as we know, and I'll say this provocatively, but it's true, the left has no problem with inciting violence. And you can see this, that they were allowing other world leaders to directly incite violence, but left their tweets up.
And I just want to say real quick that I don't think this had anything to do with public pressure on Twitter. I think they took this opportunity. They wanted to ban Trump, and they took this opportunity to do so. Nothing to do with outside pressure. Doesn't matter what you think of Trump. If you look at that tweet by Khamenei, and you can't see The problem with that, with not even censoring that, not even saying anything about it, there's a problem there. So I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think it was a very left-leaning organization that took action when it saw the opportunity.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the more we sit around and make excuses, the less people will be held accountable, and they should be. It's election interference, direct election interference, what they did, and they do need to be held accountable. And I don't care if they had pressure from the outside; they had a job to uphold, and they didn't.
Wait, I have a question. Did any okay when the Black Lives Matter, the 574 Black Lives Matter riots, ended thousands of cops with bricks, rocks, Molotov cocktails? How many people were held accountable for that? At Twitter, nobody was held accountable for that. Kamala Harris posted a bail fund. She wasn't held accountable for it. They only attacked Trump because it's against the narrative. It's what the narrative is. It's all about the narrative. And Alex Jones said this. The left is beating the right in the information game. It's what they're doing. And everything is about the narrative. Everything is. And
So sorry, I'll let you finish. Sorry, Ian.
oh no, that's basically all I had to say.
Okay, yeah. So I want to just quickly, just want to say for just if we don't mind, for everyone in the panel and off the panel, just try not to ban people. Just want to try to get all different perspectives. I'll get Brian, Ed, because I know Brian for some reason just got banned out of the room. I'm hoping it's a glitch. There was a take by Tom, and I'd like you to comment on that before we continue going through the tweets, because it's a pretty extreme take about the left don't have a problem with inciting violence. I would take a different take on it, Tom. I think there's some of them on, I think both sides of the aisle. When you go too extreme, you'll see different groups that will incite violence. I think we can find examples on both sides of the aisle. Would you agree with that, Tom? Is that a better way to characterize it?
Well, my point is that during the riots of 2020, you had the organized left and political officials excuse and condone, if not encourage, violence.
Yeah, Kamala
and
Harris
so when I
posted a
say the
bail
left
fund.
doesn't have a problem with violence, that's what I'm referencing. They use and have used violence as they've kept it in their back pocket as a threat, and they used it regularly in 2020 to undermine Trump. Remember, Trump had to flee into the basement of the White House because the Secret Service was fearful that the violent left surrounding the White House was going to burn the building down.
So I think that Mark, it's just we got to worry about avoid absolutes, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So
Well, when I say the left, I say the organized left. Look, everyone listening understands what I mean. Obviously, not all leftists support violence. Obviously, not all liberals support violence. My point is, in terms of the political conversations that we were having in 2020, the organized left and their political acolytes and allies justified and defended violence and incited it in our major cities. So let's be clear there. And so when they say they're concerned about inciting violence, they're not. They're concerned about Donald Trump objecting to an election. And this was never about violence to begin with, as it is.
I don't even think that they were concerned with Trump objecting to an election. I think they were just looking for an excuse, and him objecting to an election just happened to be the excuse that they were looking for.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
I'm going to continue reading. We'll continue the discussion right after I continue reading the tweets. So I was just organizing the panel. All right, we're up to number 20. So 20. I want to read 21 last time. I know I've read it so many times. I'll be quick this time. Ayatollah said the following: Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen. Like, ignore the whole the file drop. Ignore all this. Ignore all the discussion about Trump. All this, the left bias and all that. That alone is a concern to me. If you believe in any form of censorship, which many of us don't even believe in censorship, which means this tweet should stay. Many of us would say that. But if you believe in any form of censorship, this is probably the top of the list of tweets that should be at least deleted, or at least put a warning sign or quote unquote shadow banned. I'll go to number 21, where I think we're up to, I'm not sure if there's anything after it. 21, 22, 23, 24. All right, I've got a lot, guys. Let's go up to 20, 20, 30. Let's go. 22. no, 21. In October 2020, the former Malaysian Prime Minister said it was, quote, a right, end quote, for Muslims to, quote, kill millions of French people. That's the former Malaysian people. Twitter deleted his tweet for, quote, glorifying violence, but he remains on the platform. The tweet below was taken from the Wayback Machine. She spelled way back wrong. Oh, no, she didn't. All right, so I think that was the right decision, removing the tweet, not banning him. Fair. Maybe a shadow ban could make sense if you believe in censorship in some forms. But again, if you compare it to what happened with Trump, it just shows the bias to US politics. Let's go to number 22. Muhammad Buhari, the president of Nigeria, this is going to get interesting, incited violence against pro-Biafra groups. Quote, those of us in the fields for 30 months who went through the war will treat them in the language they understand, which is, killing them. Twitter deleted the tweet but did not ban Buhari. Number 23, in October 2021, Twitter allowed Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to call on citizens to take up arms against the Tigray region. Twitter allowed the tweet to remain up and did not ban the Prime Minister. So it's a whole tweet. I'm just going through it. It's written in another language.
Well, Mario, there's
that
more
called on
context
citizens
to
to
the
wake up.
Ethiopian one, mate. There's more context to that Ethiopian one. You need to read more than just the tweets.
But despite whatever the context, if the tweet says citizens could take arms against the Tigray region, that's inciting violence. Doesn't matter if it's the right thing or not.
Well, because the TPLF was
Before Piotr, before you chime in, there's still more dropping, so
Yeah,
I think we should continue.
But I think exclusively on Ethiopia, you need context.
And I won't get into. I want to get into Ethiopian one, but understand that things are not as simple as they may look.
It's still part of the drop, and it needs to be read here for the integrity of the call and the space. So he's reading the drop. So please let him continue.
Thanks, sir. And number 24, in early February 2021, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government threatened to arrest Twitter employees in India and to incarcerate them for up to 7 years after they restored hundreds of accounts that had been critical of him. They didn't ban him. So Twitter employees returned accounts that were critical to him, and he threatened to jail them for up to 7 years, and the tweet was not deleted. Okay. Number 25, but Twitter executives did ban Trump, even though key staffers said that Trump had not incited violence, not even in a coded way. And to be honest, I'm going to be on it. I don't usually give my opinions on things, but I just think that a lot of the things that happened in that period are wrong. A lot of the things that Trump said are too extreme, and I understand the concerns, but not even close to enough reasons to ban an account. And I was surprised when I saw his account banned. In my opinion, that was pretty extreme. Would love to see if anyone else disagrees. And number 26, less than 90 minutes after Twitter employees had determined that Trump's tweets were not in violation of Twitter policy, Vijaya Gade, Twitter's head of legal policy and trust, asked whether it could in fact be, quote, coded incitement to further violence. Okay, so less than 90 minutes after Twitter employees determined that Trump's tweets were not in violation of Twitter policy. So in other words, Vijaya wanted to amend the policy so they can ban Trump 90 minutes after employees said, hey, he did not breach policy. And there's messages there. You can go through them, the tweet pinned above. There's messages there by Vijaya trying to get that to happen. I'm not sure which. I'm not going to read them all, but I can see how I'm just going through them quickly now. She's trying to convince other employees to change the policy. Number 27, a few minutes later, Twitter employees on the quote scaled enforcement team suggest that Trump's tweets may have violated Twitter's glorification of violence policy. So that's a few minutes after Vijaya sent those messages. If you interpreted the phrase American patriots to refer to the rioters. Okay, so they're trying to see, in other words, without getting into too much detail on reading the correspondence, what we see here is the employees trying to find a way to use from the information they have to try to ban Trump and to make it look like it's within policy. Up to number 28, things escalated from there. Members of that team came in to view him as the leader of a terrorist group responsible for violence and deaths, comparable to Christchurch shooter or Hitler. And on that basis, and on the totality of his tweets, he should be deplatformed. That's extreme. Let me read out the message there. Just to update you, XXX, which means a retracted name. Just to update you, XXX, I spoke to XXX just now. They understand our assessment of this individual tweet, but they now view him as the leader of a terrorist group. That's messages within Twitter. This is within Twitter talking about the US president at the time. But they now view him as the leader of a terrorist group responsible for violence, deaths, comparable to Christchurch shooter or Hitler. And on that basis, and on the totality of his tweets, he should be deplatformed. They will continue to push that argument with leadership, and we will see where it falls. Whew. Let's go to number 29. 2 hours later, Twitter executives host a 30-minute all-staff meeting. Jack Dorsey and Vijaya Gadde answer staff questions as to why Trump wasn't banned yet, but they make some employees angrier. So we're seeing a lot of employees push Jack, and that's based on their bias to the left, push Jack and Vijaya to ban Trump. Number 30. And that shouldn't even be the case. The policy should be so coded in that such meetings were just purely for explaining the policy to employees if it needs any explanation. Let's go to number 30. Multiple tweets, Twitter employees have quoted the banality of evil, suggesting that people implementing our policies are like Nazis following orders, relays Yoel Roth to a colleague. What? I want to read this again. Multiple tweets have quoted that the banality of evil, suggesting that people implementing our policies are like Nazis following orders. How can he take it to that extreme? Let me read what he says. Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on it. Candidly, not a lot of people who are close to the decision would feel safe engaging there. Multiple tweets, that's not tweets, that's tweets. People have quoted the banality of evil, suggesting that people implementing our policies are like Nazis following orders, which, as someone responsible for our policies who had direct family members in Auschwitz, he's comparing it to a death camp, is not exactly an environment I want to wade into. People are angry and want to express themselves, but the way the conversation happens can close off meaningful engagement. Whew, okay, this shows how extreme they're taking it. We're going to continue reading them. Yeah, go ahead, Tom. Sorry, go ahead.
Quick question. I think I think we're seeing somewhat of an inflection point right here, just to kind of mark this time and date that this is either the confluence of events or some sort of excursion point in the dialogue, from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Like we've been waiting for that moment we see that shift, and there's a few more tweets, but I won't read them. Let's just take a quick break because there's another 4 or 5, and then we'll continue. Oh, there we go. Now, we'll take a quick break now, and then we'll talk about the suspension, what happens and what happens afterwards,
Real quick,
and the response to Trump's ban. Go ahead, Emma.
On the quote, read the banality of evil. That one. Did it say in the parentheses what a tweep is a Twitter employee? So they're saying, oh, people are just saying that our Twitter employees are like for not removing his account. They're all trying to. They're like perpetrating evil if they don't get rid of this account. I mean, it's just the most bizarre thing I've ever read.
Yeah, they're comparing it to like he's referencing like just looking at it objectively, they're very emotional about it. Like they genuinely see this as like their responsibility to help the US against what they see as evil, which obviously is based on bias and their own emotions and feelings, which should never have an impact on any system or any processes or protocols in place for censorship on a platform at this size.
Yeah, or they're just shady and using whatever they can to.
Ed, I'll go to Ed then Prodigal. Ed, I saw you unmute. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say, I think this is a problem. I don't know if there's an escaping of this problem. There's always going to be bias. Twitter was obviously biased to the left, but is Elon Musk's Twitter going to be biased in one direction? So he's going to have rules too. If you incite violence, you're going to be kicked off, or you're going to be suspended.
Yes, he said it's not going to be biased to one side. That's the whole point of why he wanted to purchase Twitter, was to be centered.
Can I just finish what I'm saying?
No, you're incorrect. Over 98% of employees at Twitter donated to Democrats. Can we be very clear?
That's what I'm saying.
Elon Musk voted for Biden. Elon Musk voted for Joe Biden. He voted for Obama. No, the comparison you are making is invalid.
Can I please explain what I'm saying? Can I please explain? So Elon Musk is going to be running Twitter. He's going to have a set of rules, right? Where he's going to ban people still. He's going to ban people for breaking certain rules, according to what his team,
As it should be.
let me
Yes.
just finish what I'm saying, then you can respond. So what his team believes are against the rules. There's going to be people who could be banned for inciting violence, but his line is going to be somewhere else. Maybe it would be a more liberal line. Maybe it would be more conservative line. We don't know.
Well, at least one, he'll probably outline what that line is. Two, when someone gets censored, removed, whatever, explain why.
So I think at the
Yes,
point you're
he
making,
said
and
that. Yes.
sorry, Tara. So yeah, I was just gonna say. So at the point you're making is like whoever it is leading. Like your question is that how do we prevent bias one way or
There's
another? And
always
it could be
there's always going to be a bias, and like it might not be biased as far as political bias. It could
what
be
do you think
biased
of?
toward,
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be
like
anything. I understand.
everyone has
Humans,
bias.
yeah, humans are biased. I understand. So
Well,
my question is like, go ahead, Tom.
Let's bring it back to what we just read here. We read that according to Twitter's own corporate documents, that Trump was not in violation of the rules, and they twisted reality based on their personal political animus against him, calling him a terrorist and comparing him to Hitler, to remove him from Twitter, despite no violations of the rules. So this isn't bias. This is just unhinged Twitter activists hijacking a company's operations to target their political enemy. And when you see them say that he's leading terrorists, what does that say about Twitter's approach to tens of millions of Trump supporters who were using the platform or otherwise on the platform, who were going to be similarly targeted subsequently? This is extremely damaging to the reputation of Twitter as a corporation, and you have to wonder, to Ian's point, Musk has a lot of work to do to reestablish regularity and normalcy in the management of content on the platform.
Yes, I'm going to continue. I'll give you the mic after Protocol. I'm just going to continue reading the tweets, and then we'll continue the discussion. But I think like both you and Ed kind of agree, because Ed, you're saying that bias will always exist. Tom made the point that in this case, we don't just have bias, we have like extreme bias, where it's just kind of gone a bit too far.
Yeah,
and
I mean, bias leads to extremism, and that's where you don't want to get. Hopefully, Elon can control that bias, because there's going to be bias, but hopefully it doesn't lead to
and then the question
policy.
is exactly what happens in 10 years time as employees grow again, and what will it lean one way or another? And that's not just politics. And then this is where it gets tricky, like how, and this is what, having proper systems in place. And Elon was talking to Jack, I think, a few months ago about a decentralizing certain aspects of a platform. Like imagine you could decentralize censorship in a way. It sounds pretty complex, but like there's ways to do it. I'd love to have Vivek on the show. I'm going to try to invite Vivek on because
it's like Emma said, Mario. It's like Emma said, transparency. And that's what Elon plans to do, is have it completely transparent. So you'll know exactly why you've been, put in Twitter jail or suspended or whatever it may be. You'll know. And everyone else will know as well. This account was suspended because. So, I mean, until we have that, it could be biased, like Ed was saying, but if he follows through with the things he says he's going to do with the platform, then we'll have complete transparency. It'll say you were banned for this reason.
Agree. I think transparency is a big step in that direction. I'll keep reading the tweets, guys, and then we'll continue. I think it was Asia. I'll give you the mic right after. Oh no, sorry, Protocol and then Asia.
No,
so we're up
Protocol,
to
myself, and then Asia, Mario.
All right, Protocol, Piotr. Yeah, I didn't see you. Sorry, bro. We're up to number 32, I think. Yeah. 1 hour later, so we talked about these discussions, the resistance, the meeting with Jack, in which he's explaining why Trump was not suspended to employees. Employees were not happy. They're making comparisons to Auschwitz and Hitler. And then 1 hour later, Twitter announces Trump's permanent suspension, quote, due to the risk of further incitement of violence. We go to number 33. Many at Twitter were ecstatic. So here we have Team DJT suspended. Oh my God. Yeah, so a lot of excited messages here by the team. Saw the message. Thank you to everyone for your impactful work this week, for the discussion, and for drafting all these complex assessments. I'm very proud to work and learn from you every day. Wishing you a good weekend. And then we go to the next one, and we have to understand as well, like back then, I'm not just when I make statements like this, I'm not defending one side or another. It was also a time of a lot of fear, and it was a pretty uncertain time for everyone. So the employees at Twitter, in their opinion, they thought they did something good, based on their biases, good for the US. All right, let's go to the next one. And congratulatory, big props to whoever is in trust and safety, is sitting there whack-a-moling these Trump accounts. All right, so it's just impossible to deny now the bias having an impact on a lot of people on the right, including the president himself getting suspended or shadow banned. By the next day, employees expressed eagerness to tackle medical misinformation as soon as possible. Okay, so that kind of leads us to the next drop. I'll create a space in a bit. If my team could send me a link, I'll do a space where you can all register, because we're having the next topic, before I continue reading, is going to be about COVID. And I think this is a very, very polarizing topic. I want to be very careful. I'm not a doctor myself, and getting people from doctors you all know, you've seen on TV, people from the board at Pfizer, people that are completely against the vaccine, to debate this topic, because then we're going to be talking about the censorship of COVID, which is, I get nervous even talking about that topic. It's a very tricky one. And people,
Hey, Mario,
yeah, man.
just quick. I mean, look, I just want to dig a little deeper on that. What we're seeing is almost a bipolar reality here. On one hand, you have they are Nazis, and then when this is resolved, you have this euphoria. That is not typical behavior. When you defeat a Nazi or have some sort of resolution of profound existential conflict, you have a sense of awe, if you will. And here, I mean, I think the duality of these two things come together. Euphoria and this sort of Nazi paranoia is really pathologic. So I think that in of itself is real interesting to me.
So we'll go for number 36. For the longest time, Twitter's stance was that we aren't the arbiter of truth, wrote another employee, which I respected, but never gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. So in other words, the employee is saying that he wasn't, I'm going to read out what he said. Very excited to see us handling more categories of misinformation. For the longest time, Twitter's stance was that we aren't the arbiter of truth, which should be the case. If you're a free speech, if you're a platform allowing people to speak, Chinese government can say that we don't let people talk about X, Y, and Z for the betterment of the country, for the betterment of the society, the economy. But then that gets out of hand, and now anyone that talks negatively about the president or about certain policies, they get censored, they get jailed. It just goes too extreme. So as soon as we see Twitter veering off, and I'm guessing it's happened over a period of time, veering off from just being a place where people could speak with certain limitations that we all agree on, to veering away from becoming the arbiter of what they consider the truth. Again, agree or disagree with what they consider the truth. This is where it got really dangerous. And I'd be curious to see how this evolved after Trump's suspension and what happened over the last couple of years. COVID's going to be a big one, and then what happened post-COVID as well. I'll continue reading. Twitter's stance was that we aren't the arbiter of truth, which I respected, but never gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. That said, my dad is an MD, to give context, and medical misinformation is a really hard topic. I get nervous reading this stuff. Even for COVID-19, we only covered a narrow category of misinformation. As an example is, quote, take vitamin C, vitamin D, elderberry, and xylitol with GSC daily to reduce COVID-19 risk, end quote. Good misinformation, creative marketing, or misinformation? Personally, I'm not sure, and I suspect there are views on both sides. All right, so this message there, I respect more than others. It's not as extreme. It's like, hey, I respect we're not the arbiters of truth, but then where do you consider something as misinformation or not? Where is something like, hey, is that just good marketing? Does it play a role in fighting COVID? And then we go down that slippery slope, which we won't go down in today.
Mario, if possible, I think we need to look at this not just in the context of how big tech shape public opinion, but how corporate media shape public opinion. This is an apparatus controlled by multiple multinational corporations that fed for years a narrative that anybody who supported populist policies or Trump were essentially Nazis, white supremacists, etc. So this fed into it. As somebody said earlier, they were just looking for a pretext. They had previous discussions from previous Twitter file drops showing that they were pushing to ban him over and over again, and this gave them the one use. And when people say be objective, we can be objective. right? You look at the Portland federal courts, you had 80 days of riots and attacks on a federal building. As Tom Fitton mentioned before, you literally had temporary fencing put up and a church burnt down as they tried to assault the White House. And the president of the United States, regardless of political affiliation, was forced to cower in a bunker, right? A narrative was pushed onto the entire American population, which, as Tara brought up, 90+% of these people are wholehearted Democrats, vote and donate towards them, and they used it to effectively eliminate Americans' free speech and public discourse. And I'll end with this. His comments regarding vitamin D and zinc, multiple studies have now come out confirming that lack of these specific nutrients and vitamins do increase the severity of COVID.
So I'm just going to end it protocol. So just that one there, we'll leave it for the next space.
Something to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just quickly.
Correct. I mean, people forget. I had a couple of people DM me just now. Black Lives Matter. There was over 500 riots that entered thousands of cops with bricks, rocks, Molotov cocktails. And if you remember, Kamala Harris posted a bail fund for those people that committed those crimes. Where was Kamala Harris's suspension? What happened to Kamala Harris? Nothing. She was allowed to post the bail fund, and they were allowed to get those criminals out. So there was no action taken against left-wingers who came out and said, look, we stand with these rioters that are destroying buildings, attacking cops, and there was just no accountability on the left side.
So we'll go to Piotr. I know you've been waiting for a while. Piotr, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Okay, so a couple of things here. One, context is always important. When it comes to the Ethiopian post, President Abiy Ahmed had suggested this action because the TPLF, which is the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, basically just begun launching large-scale assaults on southern parts of the Tigray province and north of the country. So there's a little bit of backstory to that. That being said, what we are seeing here is the illustration that authoritarianism and censorship exists on both sides of the aisle. There is a reason that the Nazi party was actually the Nazi Socialist Party, and why there are so similarities made between Stalin and Hitler, despite them supposedly being on the ideological opposite sides of the spectrum. So what you see here now is a clear illustration of people with a very, very influenced and impressionable perspective of what's happening across the country in DC, taking it upon themselves to pressure senior management, senior staff, as well as the staff in the top end, having their own biases, deciding that despite them being a private corporation with no ability for transparency and accountability, to take it upon themselves to make influences that will directly decide the future of the United States, even if that United States situation is very polarized, it's very difficult. Private enterprises like this should not have that much power. And I think that's extremely disturbing to hear the information that you shared, particularly when it comes from just how much of Twitter's staff were really, really pushing for this. And it shows you how in history, when you're on the center ground, you tend to gravitate towards both extremities, and then people come back or they go out again. And we've got a problem, I think, in the US on one side of the country, or some parts that you've got people who are very, very part of this very far left-wing perspective, which is, as much as I said before, censoring people's opinions as, say, you could say the far, far, far right is. Then in other parts, you've got people who sit on the other side. And what Twitter needs to be doing ultimately is actually representing a platform that people can share their perspectives and hopefully bring people more towards that center ground, and we can find accommodation, not pushing people further to the extremities. And now you've got this middle lost ground, like no man's land. It's extremely disturbing, everything you said so far.
We have a lot of tweets to catch up on here.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. By the way, everyone, I've just tweeted the link for the before I read the tweets. It's above, and it's the last tweet on my profile. So you start registering for the COVID space, which is probably like when I do spaces like this, it's gonna be very easy to slip up here or there and get into trouble. So I'm gonna try my best, and I think you guys are gonna be really impressed with the panelists that we're gonna bring into that debate. So the next round of drops will be based on COVID and the censorship around COVID. So wish us luck, and we'll see you in 2 days for that. Let's continue reading the drop. But Twitter's COO Parag Agrawal, who would later succeed Dorsey as CEO, told head of security Mudge Natko, quote, "I think a few of us should brainstorm the ripple effects of Trump's ban. Centralized content moderation, in my opinion, has reached a breaking point now." Okay, so respect. Parag, despite her biases, she realized that, from what I understand, I'm going to read out the conversation. Maybe I got it wrong, but at least we have somebody notable, someone in an executive position saying, hey, we might have taken it too far. Let me read out what Parag and Mudge are saying. Parag, I think a few of us should brainstorm the ripple effects and potential fragmentation of public conversation and how we might adapt. Mudge, who are you suggesting? Parag, not sure. A few of us on staff, maybe to start. The future of public conversation feels uncertain to me. To my mind, we need to move fast towards opening up control over policies and enforcement and decentralizing it. Respect. Okay. Like it or not, that's heading in the right direction. Centralized content moderation, in my opinion, has reached a breaking point now. Exactly. Like, this is what we're saying. This is someone on the left. I think Parag's on the left. I'm just guessing to be an executive. Someone on the left saying, hey, this seems to have gone too far and we may need to take action. And that's where the decentralized concept. And just remember, everyone, Jack, after all this happened, Jack was launching project whatever. I forgot, Sky something. And that's a project of building a decentralized social platform. There's another one called DSO. So there's like decentralized versions of Twitter coming out and trying to solve problems like this. Interested to hear what people think now that it's played out the way it has. I think more important questions now is the future of public conversation. In my mind, this is the end of the road for centralized content moderation. Hard to believe that this approach will be sustainable moving forward. I agree. Suggested to Mudge that a few of us get together to anticipate ripple effects and decide how we want to mobilize for the change ahead. So they realized, I think Parag and I think other employees realized that, hey, we took this too far and we need to not only to deal with what we just did now, but we should come up with long-term solutions for where human bias takes over free speech. 2 hours later, Twitter executive host a 30-minute all-staff meeting. Okay, now we've done that one. Where are we up to? 30 what, guys? 30. Okay, medical information. Okay, we're up to 38. Outside of the United States, Twitter's decision to ban Trump raised alarms, including with French President Macron, German Prime Minister Angela Merkel, and Mexico's President Andrés Manuel Lopez. Piotr, from these three people, Macron is liberal, is more on the left. Merkel is more in the middle, from what I know.
No, I would say Macron is center right. Merkel is center right, and then the other one I'm not sure.
And how about Andrés? How about Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador? Do you know?
Mexico or Spain?
Mexico.
He's very far left, but he's a good example of where he's actually enacted quite a lot more law enforcement. Mexico's had issues with the drug cartels this year, so he's become quite
okay. So
in certain liberties.
All to the left of Trump. All to the left of Trump.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
so
they're all centers, yeah.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to hear. So you got three people that are not, and I know Merkel, and yeah, I know both of them. Didn't Macron plant a tree with Trump, and later they became friends, best buddies, and later they kind of started bad mouthing each other. So I like this because it shows three people, and it makes that point that this is bipartisan, and I'm trying to keep it at that level as much as I can. The issue I'm talking, not in this case. In this case, obviously, is targeted to the right. But the issue itself is censorship. We have people that disagree with Trump that we're worried about Twitter's censorship. How a president of a country, of the biggest country, of the biggest economy in the world, can be censored. Number 39, Macron told an audience he didn't, quote, want to live in a democracy where the key decisions were made by private players. Exactly my point. I want it to be decided by a law voted by a representative, or by regulation, governance, democratically discussed and approved by democratic leaders. I agree. Number 40, Merkel, Germany. Merkel's spokesperson called Twitter's decision to ban Trump from his platform, quote, problematic, and added that the freedom of opinion is of, quote, elementary significance. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's in jail now, criticized the ban as an unacceptable act of censorship. And this is someone who's being censored in a country that's being censored by, and I don't want to get into a whole political discussion, but I think most of us would agree that Russia has severe censorship as well. And he's in jail based on that censorship. So I think it's across the board. You got policymakers concerned by Twitter's decision, whether they agree with it or not. And I'm going to go through the comments in a bit. I'd love to see the audience.
Can I just point out one quick thing on that? Merkel, Macron, all these people are neoliberals. So they're part of the establishment. the globalist sort of rhetoric that you will hear. Trump was not. He was much more about America first. So it's fascinating how even politicians who are against Trump or against his ideology in some ways are still against this private enterprise ability to influence freedom of speech. Very interesting point.
I agree. I think it's a very interesting tweet. I'm going to put this as one of my core tweets. Is you got policymakers that disagree with Trump that are on the left. Hold on, didn't you just say that? Doesn't matter.
Capitalism, conservatism in America is a very different interpretation in Europe. Just keep that in mind.
Understood. Just a reminder for everyone, the tweet pinned above before I continue, make sure you set your reminders for the space in 2 days. And we have another space tomorrow with Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz as well. So make sure you set your reminders for that. It's going to be a pretty crazy week. All right, number 41. Whether you agree with Navalny and Macron or the executives at Twitter, we hope this latest installment of the Twitter Files gave you insight into that unprecedented decision. From the outset, our goal in investigating the story was to discover and document the steps leading up to the banning of Trump and to put that choice into context. Ultimately, the concerns about Twitter's efforts to censor news about Hunter Biden's laptop, blacklist disfavored views, and ban a president aren't about the past choices of executives in a social media company. They're about the power of a handful of people at a private company to influence the public discourse and democracy. And that's why we're seeing people that are, I always get the panel balanced, and we have here people from both sides of the aisle on the panel, and everyone disagrees everyone agrees in one way or another that this level of censorship is a problem. And some people are calling this a nothing burger. There's 2 more tweets. Some people are calling this a nothing burger. Maybe, hate me for saying this, maybe it is now. I'm not saying it is. Even if you think it is now, later on, if this continues, this level of censorship, how far could that go? Because we saw what happens in China with high levels of censorship and other countries. Imagine now our countries, not our, because I feel our in the US, your country or anyone in the US. The US is a democracy, and anyone else living in a democracy like myself, Australia, we live in democracies. But the companies that have the power right now, Apple, Amazon, Meta, Google, are not a democracy. They do have a board, but they're not as democratic to an extent as the government. They don't have that safe system. So that means that when they start having influence, when they start censoring, they start dictating where a country heads. They literally decide what people hear, what people don't hear. If you go to China, I'm researching a lot about COVID now, different theories and stuff. When you go to China, there's a conspiracy theory that the US brought the COVID to China, US military. And then in the US, there's a theory that China intentionally released the COVID, and that's one theory, is multiple, as a weapon against the US. So you can see 2 different countries. When you meet someone, we're saying we're all on one planet, yet we have completely different versions of reality. It shows the influence of how far censorship could go. I'll read the last 2 tweets quickly, and then I'll give the mic to our co-hosts and panelists. This is it. So I'll read it again. Ultimately, the concerns about Twitter's efforts to censor news of the laptop, etc., is not about the executives. That's not the issue. The issues and the whole story, that's not the issue. The issue is about the power of a handful of people at a private company to influence public discourse and democracy. Go ahead, Tom.
This is an absurd conclusion, frankly. I mean, Barry is just showing her ideological colors here. The New York Times can do whatever it wants as a private company to moderate content on it in its publication and on its site. This is about a private company corruptly telling users that they have contracts with, telling regulators, telling shareholders, and telling Congress they are moderating content on a good faith basis. And part of that basis, and that is their ability to do that is allowed under law, but also based on the idea that, they are doing it on a good faith basis. So they've been lying and have been caught lying about what they were doing as a corporation. This isn't about, quote, democracy. This is about a company breaking the law, breaking the rules, working illicitly with the government to target political enemies of a specific party and a specific ideology. So let's forget, this is not about democracy. This is about censorship by corrupt individuals in Twitter and corrupt individuals on the outside, whether it be in government or in media, to push Twitter to do this. And to say this is about democracy and the private sector, baloney. The private sector has all sorts of abilities in the right context to censor anyone they want. But Twitter is allowed to moderate content based on the idea, or suggest that they were moderating content based on this idea that they're committed to neutrality and they were politically not biased. And it was a lie. And there needs to be accountability for this corruption.
And I think we need more transparency. I think that's one of the major solutions here. You don't want government interference in it, but I think you do want some sort of transparency, whether it's laws passed to make corporations like this more transparent, or if it's just people like Elon Musk coming along and saying, "Okay, I'm gonna just make it
which
transparent."
Tara,
I think
as
that's
Tara
a better
said,
solution.
Tara brought that point as well earlier. Elon's decision to make it transparent, like, hey, all right, we're a private company. We wanna silence people that say X, Y, and Z, but we're gonna be open about it. We're not gonna lie about it. And we silence you because you said this, and we disagree with it. I think like this. Okay, this is their right with it as a private company, but I just think they just have too much power influencing discourse to even have that right. I think the size of Meta, for example, 3 billion users, they, in my opinion, even if they're a private corporation, I think we're past them. They're just too powerful to have that right to censor. What if they were like, all right, guys, we decided we want to censor everyone on the right. It's out. We're a private company. We're going to be transparent about it. We're going to do it legally, but we're going to censor everyone. Like, because even after Twitter banned Trump, we didn't see Truth or other platforms blow up. You know, they gained. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong on this one, but I don't think the other social platforms blow up. People are still like, yeah, we'll stick to Twitter just because it's more convenient. That's where the attention is. So it just shows Twitter, Meta, they just have too much power to even have that right. I think Tom made a good point that they lied in like saying they're not censoring while they were, which is a whole different issue. And
And
being serious
Mario,
on that.
Trump wasn't
Go
the
ahead, Tara.
only one banned. Trump wasn't the only one banned either. There were so many accounts,
list of them, yeah,
conservative
so
accounts banned.
Well,
And
exactly.
to Tara's point and to your point, Mario, you know, Elon can ban people as you know, the owner of a private company. It's far different than what Twitter was doing, which was essentially acting as an extension of the U.S. government. Completely different things.
That's a good point. Yeah, we shouldn't forget as well that they did have, that was in one of the drops as well. So it's like multiple problems. I think Tim's point that this is, you know, democracy is one problem we can discuss, but there's also the fact that they lied. There's also the fact that they were talking to the FBI and as other governmental bodies as they made those decisions, and there were the back door that we talked about, and we also mentioned to remind everyone that Trump administration either never used just because they thought it wouldn't work based on the bias, or Twitter just never. I think they said never used. So it's not like Twitter got these requested and implement them. Trump's administration did not use that back door, yet the Democratic side did. And again, that could be based on Twitter's bias. So that's another issue that you mentioned, Sphinx. That's really.
Can
really
I just
did.
point out one thing here, which is that this is authoritative oppression or censorship, right? This occurs, as I said before, on both sides of the aisle. But in this case, it isn't more right-leaning reasons that it's being done. Think of China's WeChat.
Yeah, Panther, but one side of the
Russia,
aisle
right?
controls big tech. One side of the aisle, neoliberal and neocons, controls big banking. One side of the aisle controls most of the major
Protocol, I
newspapers,
wasn't finished,
6
buddy.
of the multinational corporations that control 90% of media. You can't paint this as if it's equal when one side
What I'm
completely
doing,
controls
Prodigal,
all
is using other
institutions in
countries as
American
an
society,
example
including
to talk
higher
about
education.
authoritarianism in different countries and how it applies in different contexts. I'm not putting it only in the American context. What I was trying to say was that in this case, you've got a very far group left-wing people who are doing the very thing that they are trying to do, which is to supposedly be diverse and inclusive, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's what happens when you have corporatism, which is so influential. Particularly a company that isn't a media organization, which is supposed to be a place that everybody of every aisle can come and join. I'm not disagreeing with you, and I think it's important to let people finish their point.
Go. I see Max, you've been waiting for a while, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, we look at the data that's been shown with the donations from obviously the Twitter employees that show bias there. We look at the actions taken. We look at the causality, and quite a bit of, some would say, damning evidence I try to look at everything from a rational point of view and say, hey, if I'm going to believe, my personal angle on this, I have to look at the other side and say, how are they seeing this, and how are they justifying these actions? I'm not talking about necessarily the Twitter employees right now, but those who still defend the actions that take place. And as we've said, we need to hear from both sides. That is important. But when we look at leaders of other countries who are coming in and they have they're starting to have talking points and having concerns about these decisions that have been made. When we look at, really anybody who, I don't know how objective anybody can be. This is a very polarizing topic, but I truly want to try and understand from the other side what's left here to defend.
I'm just going to add in one point. If the pretext for this was the riot that occurred on January 6th and the violence that was there, right? The only connections that have been shown to government actors are to the alphabet boys in D.C., specifically the FBI and other organizations, right? We know now the number 2 at Oath Keepers was an asset. They had at least 8 in the Proud Boys. Ray Epps was never arrested, right? If you're claiming we have to limit governments inciting violence against their citizens, the only organizations and federal actors shown to be connected to January 6th are the FBI and these other agencies. So let's try to be a little bit objective. There's no connections that have been shown to Trump at all. So, I think that we need to be fair, especially when these same state actors and federal agencies did nothing when there was $3 billion worth of damages, countless police officers blinded, injured, and killed, and cities on fire. They literally carved out their own territories in Chop Chaz in Seattle and in Minnesota. You literally had entities functioning outside of state, local, and federal government. So if we're going to be honest, let's be honest.
Are you really going to
I'll let
blame
you.
the left
Yeah, go
more
ahead,
than
Ed.
the right for that, though? Are you really going to
Yes,
blame the
you
left
want
more
to
than
talk
the
about
right
the 6
for
Black
what
Lives
happened
They
at
should.
the
Matter
I
Capitol?
can
protests
I
that
can
were
blame the
firebombed in the
CDC going
So hold on, I
online.
will let.
And,
Yeah, just quickly. So I will leave it. Yeah, Prodigal, go ahead. Respond to Ed.
yeah, I can blame them because I'm in a blue state. I couldn't bury my dead. I couldn't go to my house of worship. I saw 1/3 of businesses bankrupted. Then I saw these same health experts say, listen, you can't live your lives. Target and Home Depot can stay open. But you listen, these protests, it's for a good cause. We're going to allow it. This is once again the use of federal assets and control to limit Americans' free speech. And to argue otherwise is just disingenuous. We saw the bail funds. I'm in New York City. I saw 10, 20 blocks looted, and people were released the very next day. This is something where we saw government actors taking actions to basically protect their supporters from the law of the land. And to say otherwise is just disingenuous, and I'm surprised.
No,
I'll let
we had a riot for a couple of
Prodigal.
hours
Let Prodigal.
versus
Prodigal.
a summer of love destruction.
I'll let Ed. I'll let you respond, man,
Also, the
because I know it's
60
a pretty
plus
hot topic.
churches that were firebombed in the aftermath.
I'll give. It's too many points. Too many points, guys.
I'm just referring to January 6th. Are you really blaming the left more than the right for January 6th? Because that's,
I said I want to know what the FBI was doing. We still don't know that. Comey was recently at a hearing on the Hill, and 2 years later, he still won't tell how many federal assets and informants were embedded in this group. I don't think that all these riots were bad actors. I think it's very similar to January 6th. There's bad actors embedded, and once chaos hits, everybody gets engulfed in it. I don't think.
Why did Nancy Pelosi have a camera crew? That's what I want to know on January 6th. Why did she have a camera crew following her around?
Yeah, let me see the 14,000 hours worth of footage, and I'll let you know what I think.
Ed, do you want to respond? Because there's a lot of points being made here by Prodigal. I think it's good to have a response.
Well, I mean, the FBI plants people in all kinds of investigations. So, I mean, that's nothing new, whether you agree with it or not.
This was months beforehand. They had assets embedded at the number 2 Oath Keepers.
If there's a criminal investigation into the Oath Keepers,
why wouldn't they counteract it before it occurred?
So Prodigal. I know. Just I'll let Ed respond, man, just so he can get his point as well.
I mean, if there was a criminal investigation into one of these groups, the FBI could have had plants, and that's nothing new. That's been going on for 100 years. So since the FBI was created, that's been going on. So, I mean, you can't blame the left for something that's been policy of the FBI for.
I didn't blame the left. I said if we want to know which government actors were involved in January 6th, then let's find out instead of painting a narrative it was Trump.
Oh, I
I'm not
agree. I
arguing
agree
that the
100%.
informants are a key part of it, right? The question is, if you had these assets embedded for months, as high up as the structure, as the number two, and you didn't move on this, and the Capitol Police were refused when they were offered for a week by Pelosi and other people on the Hill, then we need to know why this occurred. We need to know why magnetically sealed doors that cannot open without a code open. We need to know why Capitol Police were waving people in. We need to know why the Q shaman was walked in to the Senate building. Right? This is questions. If this is the worst thing since 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, then let's have transparency, like Tara said. We haven't. Instead, we've had a narrative basically trying to take the state surveillance state and focus it on 74 million Americans who voted for Trump, who are mostly law-abiding, and basically an expansion of the surveillance state to eliminate their rights to organize, to have free speech, and to ensure integrity in their elections. So we're having a very different conversation, right?
Well,
Well, I think he was still
getting
on there
back to
who killed JFK.
hold on a second.
All right,
Getting
go ahead,
back
Tom.
to getting back to the file released today. What's interesting about this is that January 6th, it's clear Trump's tweets about January 6th were not the reason he was deplatformed. The reason he was deplatformed was because of political animus against him by Twitter activist employees. So, some of these issues are important to discuss that are being raised. But you have Twitter saying, well, Trump did nothing wrong on January 6th in terms of his tweets. We can't think of a reason to deplatform for him because of those tweets. And the irony is that Twitter's deplatformed him anyway. And that to me is the big news here, is that Twitter found Trump's tweets were okay, but changed the rules to deplatform him anyway. And then they recognize, and what's the other irony here is the criticisms of Elon Musk's way of running Twitter is how he's putting these policies in place without thinking about, what the ripple effects are going to be. Here, they make this new rule up for Trump, and then they start talking among themselves about what the implications of this new rule is going to be. The hypocrisy of the criticism of Elon Musk is pretty apparent when you look the way Twitter was operating before he took over. It was make the rules up as they go along. And it's funny how all the rules seem to benefit one ideological side of the equation and not the other, and one partisan side of the equation and not the other.
One of the more notable things on today's drop, as I see it, was the fact that they knew full well that Trump wasn't violating any of their terms of service. But in the next sentence, they keep insisting that Trump was a threat to democracy. Well, which is it? Which is it? Is it a guy that hasn't even violated the terms of service on Twitter, or is he an all-out threat to democracy? To me, this is just really shows how disingenuous they were really operating. And furthermore, the schoolgirl and giddiness in their messages, getting schoolgirl-like giddiness in their messages that they're sending back and forth to each other following the suspension of the supposed threat to democracy. It kind of really tells you everything you need to know.
So I've got a question, Stephen. I'm not sure. Have you used the other platforms? I think there's one called, there's obviously Truth Social, and there's one called Rumble, I think. I don't know if it's Rumble or something else. Do they censor at all, or they all focus on free speech? Like, because obviously they're more, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're more conservative platforms. Do they censor people on the left or not?
That's a great question. So from what I've been able to see, I'm on Truth Social. I hardly use it. I'm not particularly too fond of the platform, to be honest. I think it's set up to be too much of an echo chamber, and I think I actually liked Elon suggesting that he named it Trumpet. I thought that would be pretty good. But from what I understand, they're certainly have much more lax in terms of freedom of speech as Twitter 1.0 has been. But Rumble seems to be the most vibrant, successful YouTube alternative there is out there so far, and some pretty high-profile people from Glenn Greenwald has a show on there now, and Russell Brand is broadcasting there as well. So out of all of the alt tech platforms, I would say Rumble's probably the most well positioned to be a viable alternative.
And there's another one called Parlay as well, that I tried. We had someone from Parlay on the panel a few times. But from what you know, guys, they don't censor.
So I've been on Parlay,
Well-
I've been on Gab, I've been on, of course, DSO, which is diamondapp.com, and I've also been on Truth Social. And I actually had some posts censored on Truth Social. They were pro-choice tweets truths that I made, and they were removed. So
That's ridiculous.
I think
Yeah,
they
can I just say I tested out Rumble about a week ago, and I wasn't removed, but some of my material was sort of, should we say, suspended or suppressed because I was taking a little bit more.
Were you guys suspended? Were either of you suspended from these other platforms? I'm just curious.
Yes, I was suspended for a day. Yes, I was.
But were
you permanently banned, suspended?
I was.
There's a reason my account's 4 months old.
Whataboutism isn't the best form of argument. Sorry.
No, you weren't suspended, or you were?
I was not. I don't know if you're speaking.
Okay.
No, so
and that's Ed speaking. And Ed, you were suspended from Twitter, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but how long have you used the other platform for, Ed?
I don't really, like, other than Diamond App, I don't really use any of the other platforms too much. Like, here and there, I would make a post. I do use, what's the new, I do use post.news a little bit, but I mean, that's like a heavily.
So the point I want to say is, like, I don't know anything. I don't want to talk about Rumble. I don't want to talk about Truth. I've never used any of them. It's just that maybe they're perfect now. Maybe they don't censor now. Obviously, it shows otherwise. But let's say even if they don't censor now, the problem of having people decide what should be censored doesn't matter what they believe. People are far from perfect as a species. Like, you're looking at it from a science-based perspective, we're far from perfect. We get emotional, we judge, we have bias, we have herd mentality. We saw that in Twitter. We saw a lot of these things in Twitter. So as humans making those decisions when it comes to such an important thing, and that's the whole purpose of having a democracy. So the point, in my opinion, stands that whatever platform, now those platforms are smaller. So maybe they're like, when you're small, I think there's a certain level where censorship, if you're small, like, hey, we're a conservative platform and this is what we want to do. And if they don't have a billion users or 500 million users, then that's fine, because there should be a line drawn, as we talked about earlier. There should be a line drawn as when does it become a responsibility to never censor, not censor and tell people we're censoring and being transparent about it, as Tari mentioned. I think that is happening. Elon's doing that, and I think it's really important. But there should be a line as well where you're too big to censor. You know, we talked about too big to fail in 2008. Too big to censor because you'll have too much influence or too much impact. You're too big of a monopoly. I think Meta is definitely in that category. I saw someone unmute.
Well,
but yeah,
I think you have to always have some level of censorship, right? Like child pornography, you have to censor that.
Vivek and Ian had a really good debate on this. I might actually do a poll. I'll do a poll now and see what people think. But they had a really good opinion. It's like, what should you censor then? Now, when we talk about censorship, none of us wants to. I use the example of seeing heads getting chopped off. None of us want to see that type of content. Should that content be censored for the good of community? Or talking about child pornography, for example, should those things be censored? And then Vivek came in and very intellectually, a very, very good discussion. And he's like, look, if you believe no censorship, there should be no censorship. Because as soon as you decide what should be censored, that's where you risk of it getting out of control. I think it's somewhere in the middle. Alpha, sorry, go ahead, Ed, and I'll give it to Alpha.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, though. You know, once you, like you said, once you say one thing should be censored, it's child pornography. And I think probably 99.9% of the world would say child pornography should be censored. But once you do that, then what else do you censor? How far do you go? And it's where that line is drawn. And every single person is going to have a slightly different line. And some lines are going to be more conservative, some are going to be more liberal, not from a political standpoint, but from just how much you censor.
I want to ask Tom and Tara that question actually before I go to Alpha. Like, Tom, when do you think, and Tara as well, like, when do you think censorship, like, how do we know where to draw the line as a society?
Well, you know, there's the American context, which I think we ought to be following, as Twitter is an American company, and we're talking about the president of the United States of Twitter, in terms of his account. legal content should generally be protected. And, my view is under Section 230, these companies are supposed to be operating as bulletin boards. And they can only take down posts under Section 230 that are, and there's this list of categories in Section 230, including pornography and incitement to violence. It's typically material that isn't protected by law. Some others which are, but arguably it's so outrageous to the common man that someone could take it down. And to the degree there's going to be any censorship, it should be kind of a narrow interpretation of those Section 230 terms. They've reinterpreted or overinterpreted or expanded Section 230 to include anything they want to take down, which I don't think the intent of the law was, and I think it's being misread. But that's neither here nor there, since the courts disagree with me more or less. Look, if there's pornography that's not speech, it's not, quote, censorship to take it down. This debate is about speech. There's not much debate about inciting violence. Here, he wasn't inciting violence, and they didn't take it down. The question is, are we going to allow ideologues to take over a company and censor their opponents while telling everyone they're not? These are good debates to have, but they're pretending they're doing something in a straightforward, good faith way when they're not. And, once they start doing things in a good faith way, those debates may be worth having, because then you kind of start running up against the guardrails that people try to put in place. But we're a long way from that. Stop censoring me because of my politics. Stop censoring me because I disagree with government policy on major public health matters. Stop censoring me because I dispute an election. Stop censoring me because I oppose transgender extremism. Stop censoring me because I disagree with your efforts to destroy Western civilization. Let's figure that out first before we start arguing whether child pornography should be given protections on Twitter, because I don't want that to happen.
I agree, Tom. And I was just going to say that with the way that Elon has already put community notes into place, it's going to become a matter of, I think, sort of policing each other and deciding what should and should not be allowed on Twitter. And I think that is ultimately the way Elon Musk wants to see Twitter democratizes, by doing that, by putting up polls and saying, should Donald Trump's account be reinstated? What does the community say? What do the users of Twitter believe? And that's where we do need the human eye. We do need humans, looking at information and deciding what should and shouldn't be there. And yes, of course, there's always going to be biased, but at the same time, it could be much more balanced than it was. I mean, almost 100% to the Democratic or left side is just not okay. And I mean, I think the way it's headed already, the things that we're allowed to talk about already within the couple months that Elon Musk has been here, just goes to show you that it's heading in the right direction. I mean, I can tweet about things that I would have definitely been suspended for before. So I think we're heading in the right direction. I think he's reinstating accounts like Ed here and several others, mainly, right side conservative accounts. And I think it's going to open up a dialogue again, and we get to sort of police each other, just like a citizen's arrest on Twitter. You go and report something. If you see something, report it. And so far, so good as far as reporting goes. Accounts are, it's already better. It's already being treated way differently. And then, community notes. So I think, with all of those things, it's just going to improve the platform and improve the balance that needs to happen. And I appreciate, Mario, the way that you run these spaces. I get a lot of DMs from people saying, why is so-and-so up there? Why is so-and-so allowed to speak? That is the point, you guys. Free speech. That is the point of all of this, is that we don't just live in an echo chamber. We get to hear from both sides of the aisle, from, all parts of the world. Twitter isn't just even America. So it's not necessarily even just left or right. It's a beautiful thing. And I appreciate Mario for being able to, host very subjectively and be, on your toes and be able to manage. And these are topics that most people don't want to talk about. These are topics that are scary. I mean, you go to Thanksgiving with your family and you don't talk about politics, right? So to be able to sit in a room like this and have adult conversations, and yeah, we don't all agree. A lot of us are on, opposite sides of the spectrum, but to be able to do that is the biggest thing that we can do as users of Twitter. So good job, guys.
If you think this one is hard, yeah, I'll give Piotr. I want to give it to Alpha because I know he's been waiting for a while. Then we'll go to you, Piotr. But if you think this was hard, Wednesday's gonna be a shit show. Like when we bring COVID, whew, I'm like trying to research as much as I can and trying to bring.
I'll have my mouth shut on that one because I want to hear the information.
Yeah, I think
I've been through the ringer with COVID conversations. I had a lot of
it's so tough.
It is. I can hear and see and understand. You're kind of terrified as you're even talking about it. I mean,
yeah, but I'm bringing the people we're bringing are very high profile people that all of you would know, which is really cool. So I think we'll hear, and they even disagree. Like I'm talking about people that know what they're talking about. They specialize in this. From someone being a doctor that you see on TV almost every week to someone who's on the board of Pfizer and speaks at all these events, etc. And they disagree. So I think having them get a good, healthy disagreement, a discussion ongoing should be really interesting. And we'll see how the audience, like, we're going to try our best in 2 days. So be prepped for a potential shit show, but we're going to try to keep it as civil as possible. Alpha, you've been waiting for a while, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mario, Taro, and Tom. I'll try to shotgun some points out real quick, and then if you guys want to bring me back later to discuss them, I don't mind. And like I said, anyone that's part of media, podcasting, or news, feel free to reach out to me. So the first thing is regarding the January 6th stuff and protocol. Thanks for all the stuff you're sharing. I love you, brother. There's a name that everybody needs to look into because there's no real talk around this guy. His name is Evan Newman, and it's Newman, Neumann. He's documented. It's on justice.gov. Anybody wants the link, DM me. I'll send it to you. The FBI has this guy, or had this guy listed. He was at January 6th. He was wearing a Ukrainian Orange Revolution scarf during the time. The FBI contacts him in San Francisco in February, like 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks following the Capitol incident, and they let him go. He ultimately ends up getting asylum in Belarus, and he went there. So if you guys are looking into the video, find more people with these scars, because we keep trying to say it's the right, we keep trying to say it's MAGA, and if you look, not as a whole, but if you look at the majority of a lot of MAGA or conservatives or the patriots don't support the Ukrainian side of the Ukrainian-Russia thing that's going on right now. So that alone is an anomaly that doesn't make sense. Now, with regards to January 6th and my thing, I'm one of all the people that are involved in January 6th that is getting charged on a January 6th FBI case number, and I wasn't at the Capitol. I'm being charged because of what led the investigation started based off me tweeting about January 6th. I'm one of 2 people that I know of that's being charged that wasn't at the Capitol on January 6th. In addition to that, the FBI agent that's handling my case is Enrique Armenta.
So do you mind if I ask you, sorry, Alpha, do you mind if I ask you, by the way, I'm chatting to Barry to see if Barry Weiss can join us today to go through her drop. But just a quick question, and I know with the conversation is kind of digressing to January 6th, but like what were the tweets, if you don't mind me asking, that led to the FBI investigation? If you're open to sharing.
No, I'm 100% open to sharing. I have to bring them up that way I can quote them. I have them saved on a folder. But real quick, the point I want to make before I get to the tweets is the FBI agent, because this is more important than my case. This is probably one of the most important things let me just say it. The FBI agent is Special Agent Enrique Armenta. He's the same agent that was responsible for handling the Capitol poster boy with the tattoos on his neck. Now his name evades me, of course. But you guys know who I'm talking about. He was the one that came out on time. He testified before the Capitol. The allegations were that a January 6th tased him. My FBI agent that's investigating my case is the same one that was in charge. Fanon, thank you, Capitol Officer Fanon. He's the same agent that was tasked with handling that. On August,
and just
I'll get to your,
without going too deep, because we're getting a bit too deep into January 6th, but I know that you're personally impacted by it, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to go into it, Mario, but I want to make this point because this is there are a lot of important ones, but this one specifically. On August the 4th of 2021, Armenta, along with another person assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, came to my house to return my electronic evidence. While he was there, I asked Special Agent Armenta, I go, you know, people do not trust the FBI anymore. And he goes, why do you say that? I go, yeah, Director Ray from the FBI on TV go and lie that he had not seen any evidence of Antifa or BLM at January 6th. I go, at a minimum, everybody had already seen the pictures and videos of John Sullivan. This is what the FBI agent told me. He goes, well, of course he said that. He can't say anything that's going to help Trump. So I looked at him. I have 14 years working law enforcement undercover as a detective in homicides and gangs. I looked at him. I said, when you're under oath, I go, you don't get to lie. I go, I don't like Biden, but if Biden said something, I would have to acknowledge it. Even his partner looked at him like, what did you say? They shifted the conversation. I had my attorneys reach out to the district attorney to give copies of that audio from that contact. After about 2 months of requesting it, the district attorney's office said the FBI contacted them and said there was no recording of that contact. So you're telling me the FBI went to the home, my home, of an alleged January 6th suspect, and they didn't record that conversation? No. I had already went on a couple radio shows and podcasts telling everybody I'm going to release that audio. They destroyed it. What I'm saying to Tom or anybody that's listening, I will take a polygraph on live TV and testify to what I said and more specifics. Because I know it's not admissible in court, but the court of public opinion, it is. Now, with regards to what you're saying, Mario, there was 6 tweets. There was 3 that they focused on. One was a picture of, and I'll summarize it because while I was talking, I wasn't opening up the file because I'm a Marine. We're not great at multitasking.
All good, man. Thanks for the service. But yeah, if you can keep it within 60 seconds if you can, if the tweets are not too long.
Yeah, no, I'm clicking on it and I'm bringing it up right now. So the first tweet is dated January 6th of 21, and I'm going to read it quoting. I go, will you fight, bleed, and maybe even die with me as we take on the evil that is now stealing our nation? I'm a Marine combat veteran, law enforcement veteran of 14 years, and my allegiance is to God, family, and country. I'm ready, are you? It's time to patriot the F up. God wins. The second tweet said January 19th, 4:30. The third tweet was a picture of the skull with the stars around it, and it had the 3 lines on the skull, which they say stands for the 3%ers. It only appears one time in my Twitter. They try to take this out of context. So the first thing with regards to the tweet, I say take on the evil. I don't say take on the government. I don't say take on the FBI. I don't say take on the Department of Justice. I say evil. So they're self-acknowledging themselves as the evil. The second thing is they took it out of context because there's nothing in there where I'm doing a call of you can die for your country.
I'm going to do this. I've just got up an idea. I just did a poll for the audience. Now, obviously, January 6th seems to be a very divisive event as well. Not something I even considered covering, but I've just put out a poll. Let's see if the audience thinks it's a good point to cover. Like we can bring people like yourself, Alpha. I appreciate you coming on stage. I'm going to send you my number on WhatsApp so we can communicate directly. And if we do this space, we'd love to have you on the panel. We can get someone from the FBI or ex-FBI to come on stage as well and like go through the tweets, like what you said, targeting the evil, targeting evil when they say, hey, maybe you're implying you're referring to us. I don't know. Like they can probably look into it. He might be like, yeah, actually, that's a bit weird that they're using this as a reason to indict you, whatever, investigate you. So I think I'll ask the audience to see if it's a worthwhile discussion. Every space I do ask the audience. I did a poll earlier if they want us to cover the World Cup and get a few commentators to cover the World Cup, get a few players. I think we can get Messi because I was on a space with Messi not long ago. I was invited to a space with Messi. So I'll see.
I'll wrap it up in 30 seconds just to make
30 seconds, man. If you don't mind, please, bro. Please.
Yeah, I'll make it a quick 30 seconds. So one, the detective that interviewed me during the interview, which is recorded, he even stated, he goes, well, you know how to tweet without violating the law. So that statement alone says that he knew my tweets weren't in violation. The second thing is my tweets didn't even violate Twitter's policies because I've been put in Twitter jail like most people. I did an interview with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny where they suspended my main big account. And the last thing that I'll say so everybody understands is I wasn't some crappy cop. I've been awarded the Medal of Valor. I have an award that's signed from the FBI, signed by James Comey. I have awards from Congress, awards from the Senate. So this is who they did it to. I'd love to come back, give you guys the detail. Tom,
man, I think you'll be Alpha. I think you'll be coming back, man. I just did a space and it's already I didn't expect this at all. It's at 85%. It's already 1,200 people voted. in like seconds. It's at 85% saying yes. Wow. Okay, I didn't
Well,
expect this at all.
there's a lot of stuff people don't know, Mario. Like I said, I was on a tactical team, so I know about the deployment of flashbangs. I can help you cover all that stuff. But when it comes to free speech, what we're talking about here, I am an absolutist. If a private company wants to make rules regarding their private company, then that's a private company. But then they fall out of Section 230. It's when the government tries to get in the way and use these private companies to come after you is where we have an issue. But thanks for the time, Mario, Tara, Tom, and the audience that's listening.
Alpha, yeah, I'm gonna send you a DM. Let me tell the team now to send you a DM. Send my WhatsApp to Alpha. If you can connect with me, bro, I'll be very grateful. I'm sure you have other people that can come on stage as well. We can get people on both sides of the argument, because obviously the audience really wants that investigation. And for the audience, just as you know how I do things, I'll be getting both perspectives, so you hear both sides of a story, and try to get information in a very civil way, because it's again, January 6 events. I call them events. Like, I didn't even know what to call them, because if I use the word riot, some people say I'm being biased. If I use another word, insurrection or whatever other words they use, bias. So I just put events to try to keep it as objective as possible. And yeah, we'll see what comes out of it, because that's going to be another tricky one. But again, appreciate you, man, and check your DMs for when you get it. Atia, you've been waiting for a while. Mike is yours.
You meant me, right?
I did, yeah. I'm really bad. Achia?
Athia, yeah.
Achia.
No,
Athia, shit. Sorry.
you're good. You're good. Yeah. So there's a lot here, and Alpha, yeah. Thank you for speaking on that. Very, very important stuff, obviously. But to go back to the file drop, and really the conversation, as Tom said, being around the dangers of suppression and free speech. I think that Elon is being intentional. He's talked about the importance of being intentional with any of the businesses that he's had. And I think that he's doing that to develop Twitter, to show that it's going to be a very different animal, 2.0 versus 1.0. And I think that he's intentionally demonstrating that through transparency. And obviously, the way that he's doing that is by getting ahead of all of this past stuff by opening it up and sharing it. So given that, we can look at the things that he said he plans to do to neutralize, or to try to make Twitter now moving forward.
Athia, can you tell us very briefly, before I go to Piotr, can you tell us, like, what did Elon say he will do to counter the censorship on Twitter? I think Tara knows a lot about it as well, but I'll let you continue what you're saying and maybe touch on do you know what he's actually, what his plan is?
Yeah, so he's been a little bit sporadic about it, but he said a couple of things. So the first thing that he said was that nothing that is accurate will be taken down or suppressed. And then, of course, there were questions. People asked, how do you define what is accurate?
Exactly.
Right. He didn't specifically answer that, but I'm sure he's looking at it. And then he said, anyone being deceitful won't be tolerated. So that's a little bit ambiguous. What does that mean? But anyone trying to pass themselves off as someone else, that won't be tolerated. And then he said, so kind of the next rung is anyone being harmful or inciting violence will be suspended. He didn't say permanently banned, but he said suspended. And that is all just based on the content, having nothing to do with which side of the aisle that they're on. So he's looking at it as
interesting.
The threads and the content, totally nonpartisan.
Go ahead, Tara.
I was just going to say, suspended is permanently banned. When your account is suspended, you're banned.
Some people, okay, so it is permanently banned. Okay. Some people were saying that it might not be, but okay, that's good.
Well, as we've seen, I mean, there are ways to bring them back, right? So we've seen Elon bring them back. So it is a little bit tough, but once your account is suspended, you can file an appeal. Usually doesn't go anywhere. You could ask Ed about that. He's in here. But yeah, once you're suspended, that's like you're gone. You're gone. But unless, Elon flips a switch and says you're allowed to come back, which he did with Kathy Griffin, who, he was, I think, the owner, right, when she was suspended. So I don't know. And that was for impersonating him with a blue check mark.
You go ahead, Tom.
Musk just tweeted out in highlighting Barry Weiss's latest thread. Under pressure from hundreds of activist employees, which is the way to describe them, Twitter deplatforms Trump, a sitting U.S. president, even though they themselves acknowledge that he didn't violate the rules. Again, this is the head of the corporation of Twitter confirming what his corporate documents say. Now, I've complained about the release of these records through this process because it gave the media an out to not report on the records because they, quote, didn't have access to them. Of course, you know that is usually excuse, not a reason, but it's an excuse that may fly with some quarters. But when you have the head of a corporation making these admissions about misconduct by the prior management, both in terms of election interference and abuse targeting the elected head of our government, it's hard to fathom why the media wouldn't be paying more attention to this and why government agencies wouldn't be paying more attention to this. And to me, that's a striking point to highlight. And just quickly, secondly, what's also remarkable, at least as it's being presented here, is the quick pivot between suppressing Trump to suppressing material about COVID. And they quickly escalated, at least I know in my personal experience, suppression of information that the public health establishment and the transnational establishment in the public health sector, namely WHO, did not like. So this was just this was quickly metastasized this censorship of Trump, not only to hundreds of thousands of other accounts that we saw subsequently, but to professionals who've covered this, scientists, doctors, and expert commentators like myself, who were basically just highlighting government information in a way that was as pro-government as or government-oriented to make it seem as if that the private company actually became subsumed into the government operation in terms of the COVID so-called misinformation management.
Yeah, I've just done a tweet I want to get from the audience before we Piotr. First, I want to acknowledge what you said, Tom. Like Elon's highlight that, I don't have the tweet open in front of me, but essentially executives at Twitter, that's the core issue here. Executives at Twitter, based on their own biases, decided to suspend the sitting president of the United States, which is the major issue. Now, about COVID, and I'll just use the word misinformation very loosely. I've just done a tweet now. I want to get the audience's thoughts. I want to get a better understanding, because it seems that Elon is like, he even named Fauci in a tweet yesterday or the day before, which is that caught me by surprise. So I'd love everyone's take on it before we get the debate going on in 2 days.
Really quickly, can I just add that he just pointed out exactly what I was pointing out earlier, in that it was the Twitter activist employees who were the ones who were applying this pressure. It wasn't outside pressure. It was literally the employees of Twitter who were applying the pressure to get Trump off the platform.
No, that's true. That's true. I think the outside pressure that was.
So wasn't the government? I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? We've seen the drop showing that the FBI and DHS was meeting weekly with them, and they were bragging about it. So, I mean, clearly they're not mutually exclusive. Yes, the Twitter employees overwhelmingly push and cheer this on. Yes, but we cannot negate that federal actors and agencies were circumventing 230, which offers broad immunity to tech companies as an extra legal means to take away constitutional rights from Americans for free speech on the digital public square. I think they're not mutually exclusive.
So I just want to
Mario, just please. They are not constitutional rights.
Your mic.
Okay, I'll come back. I'll come back.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'll give you the mic. Put your hand up and I'll give you the mic as soon as you're back with the right mic. I think just Tara, the point that was made earlier about outside influence, I think what they meant is less direct influence and more based on outside beliefs or things that happened outside the platform, which made them just hate Trump more. That made them make that decision, which is not indemnifying them in any way, just saying that the influence came from the outside, which is wrong. So it's kind of highlighting that point. Also, it's I think there's drops in the past that did say that FBI had regular meetings and executives had regular meetings with executives at Twitter, which makes the situation worse, because if this is purely an inside job, then we go back to the things like, hey, it's not illegal. Obviously, Tom will go back and say something important, which is that they lied about it. That's a different story. But the private company could censor whatever they like based on current law. But then if the if the FBI influence their decisions, then we're talking about a whole different story. And I think that's the point that Prodigal was making. And then the last thing I wanted to say, I forgot. So I'll give the mic to Fidgetal dropped out. Go ahead, Stephen.
But yeah, I was going to add.
Piotr, sorry, bro. I know Piotr has been waiting for a while. Is that okay, Stephen? I'll give you the mic right after Piotr.
No problem.
Thanks, bro. Thanks. Piotr, my question to you is a bit different. I know you probably have a point yourself to make, but like we've brought up the January 6 events, and I don't want to digress again, but I brought up the January 6 events. So I would love you on the panel to discuss that, because you were in Washington when that happened, yeah?
I was about 3 blocks from the Capitol at a friend's house at the time, yes.
Ah, cool. Yeah, would love you to come on in 2 days as well, as we get that debate going. But you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'll participate in that. That day was pretty interesting. I think that, you know, to what was said a few minutes back by Tara, you know, facetiously, I'm going to be that person speaking now who some people in the audience don't want to hear from. But if you truly believe in freedom of speech and expression, then you're going to have to accept alternative perspectives. And I just think on the point about if we want to get true representation of people's opinions on Twitter and who should be let on or what the dynamics are on the platform, we need to see consistency. I know Musk has had the account platform for 2 months, 6 weeks. What I would appreciate from him is a clear roadmap, a clear visualization, a strategical plan that gives to me an illustration of what he wants to achieve, by when, including whom, to do to what ends, that sort of thing. The other thing is that when we're talking about whether or not we should reinstall people's accounts, don't forget that a poll done by him is only seen by people who follow him or who it's retweeted and therefore their followers. So the final vote was what, 2.5 million, which is obviously not reflective of the entirety of Twitter. So if we're going to be pedantic about statistical representation, we need to make sure.
Are you talking about the Twitter votes?
Yeah, the polls. Because
yeah, but no, you can't use those polls as a guide just because the impact.
No, but we're
the
making
bots.
reference to them, so I think we should keep that in mind. The other thing I would just say, no, just being pedantic if we're going to be. But the other thing I would just say is, you know, we need to have blunt and frank discussions about. He did resuspend Ye, or Ye, or however the hell you pronounce it. So, you know, is that something that we want to see no more of at all, or does it apply in very specific circumstances? And I know what Tom was talking about, that we need to address certain other things first before we perhaps go towards the specificities of child pornography. But I still think it's something that needs to, you know, a conversation needs to begin to be held about that sort of thing. That's all. But that's all I wanted to add for the time being.
And while you were speaking, Ian, what's up, man? Ian?
Is he up as a speaker? I only see him as a listener, but I did see Eric came up here. I would love to hear from Eric on the topic as well.
He's yeah, I think it's glitching for him. I know Stephen. I said I'll give. Oh, he's requesting again. So while he's requesting, get Ian's thoughts on all this. Stephen, I hope you're back up, Stephen, because I know it was glitching for you.
Yeah,
as well.
just glitched out.
Oh, good man, you're back.
Okay. Yeah. What I was just gonna add is. Oh, sorry.
I'm in now. Yeah, like it was having issues, I think.
Hey,
Can you hear
man,
me now?
how are you?
It's like,
yeah, bro, we can hear you.
It's doing the connection thing, which is always fun. Okay, yeah, it's working. Oh,
Steven,
yeah, I was
yeah,
like,
so
I wrote up the article on Twitter file, so it's up on Rebel News if you guys want to read it. It's a breakdown of what they released today.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Ian? Because I think it's glitching. You can't
I can
hear
hear
me.
all of you.
Ah, perfect. Yeah, well, I'd love, because I know Stephen is going to speak as well, but I'd love since you just jumped in, your take on the drop today. I think it was it gave us direct insight and communication on how they ended up deciding to ban Trump and how they're trying to find a way to ban him.
Yep.
What are your thoughts? I think today's drop is a lot juicier than previous ones. We expected it to be pretty. I was expecting it to be pretty lame.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be lame. You know, I thought, oh, it's just going to be more of the same. But no, I was actually quite excited about this. You know, when she started tweeting about the internal conversations that Vijaya Gadde in particular had about this, it's like she admitted, right? Vijaya Gadde, who was, you know, along with Yoel Roth acting as the CEO of the company, decided that, you know what, Trump didn't violate any of the rules, that we're going to take action against him anyway. And that, I think, set the precedent, which I tweeted to Elon Musk, right? It set the precedent for how they acted against other Twitter users in the months and probably year afterwards, where they would, just skirt their own rules. They didn't follow any of their own rules. They were just happy to apply subjective reasoning to anything people were posting. It was, the start of what I would say the, branding people as stochastic terrorists. Like anything that anybody says can be interpreted in the way that, is the most negative way possible. Like nothing Trump said violated the rules. I mean, he called people patriots, and he said that, hey, my people who voted for me should not be disrespected. How is any of that incitement to violence? They admitted that it didn't incite, it was not inciting violence, and yet they banned him anyway. That is really concerning, especially considering how other world leaders have called directly for violence against people, for instance, Ayatollah Khomeini and all these African leaders, and no action was taken against them. Like some of their tweets are still up and some of them were deleted, but no serious action was taken against them at all. And yet somehow with Trump, you had all these very emotional people going on about how, his actions are dangerous to democracy. And, you have like one or two outliers, like these junior employees, like one guy from China was like, this is really concerning, that I'm concerned that this is going to impact free speech. And, it's funny that it's foreigners who are pointing out how what they're doing is so inherently undemocratic and it's dangerous. It sets this terrible precedent. And the executives just don't listen. They just act on their impulses because they believe they know better than anybody else.
Foreigners know firsthand the detriment of doing that because that's what they fled from. So they're the ones who are going to take a stand and say, this is not okay. This is not the way things should be handled. It actually makes perfect sense.
And before a question for you, Ian, before I go to Stephen. Two highlights for me as well were, other than what you mentioned, one of them is the references by Yoel, I think his name is Yoel, to Auschwitz and Hitler, and even putting both these, putting Trump's actions with those events was ridiculous to me. And the other one was an employee that was based in China. So and we saw other employees. I want to also highlight, we saw employees say, guys, I think we're kind of going too far with this. And we had an employee from China say, guys, if we start censoring, even if I agree, if we start censoring, then we're heading down a really dangerous path. And then lastly, the third point, and I would love your take on it as well, is the person that became CEO, again, I'm bad with names, that took over from Jack. She did, yeah, exactly. But she did say afterwards, I would love your take on this. She's like, now we've gone a bit too far, and I'm paraphrasing, and we've got to look at other solutions, because when you start to censor, you go down a slippery slope, and we've gone a bit too far on that slope. And we need to have a meeting to discuss first how to deal with the impact, the repercussions of what we just did, but also how we can solve this issue of bias censorship. And she even mentioned the concept of quote unquote decentralizing it. What are your thoughts on these 3 points?
Mario. Parag is a guy.
Sorry, bro. Yeah. What are your
You
thoughts
better
on these
get
three?
his pronouns right.
I mean, if anything,
how would you exactly decentralize censorship? Like, how would you decentralize the suspending of
having
accounts?
brothers, it's just patently absurd, right? I mean, first of all, why the hell censor him in the first place? I know they don't like him, and Yoel Roth's own tweets prior to this, like in 2017, he was saying that a Nazi is in the White House. That has clearly colored his judgment, and it's fine to have your own biases, right? I mean, everybody's got biases. I don't like certain people. That doesn't mean I want them censored, because I know that there are larger implications of this. And Yoel Roth seems so adamant on ignoring the advice of the people working beneath him. I mean, like in the previous drop on number 4, there was an instance where one of the employees was pointing out to him how Trump didn't actually violate any rules and how we might be in violation of our own terms of service. And he was like, acknowledge. Like he was like, okay, whatever. Like that was his reaction to being told that he has to follow the rules. Like he was not interested in that. And that's quite clear from the way that he ran the trust and safety thing. I mean, looking at what Elon Musk himself posted, off Yoel Roth, this guy has this history of promoting sexual deviance, not just, in his personal life or whatever, but on Twitter, right? I mean, this is the reason why Twitter was so friendly to like pornography, because this guy literally put porn in the office, right? And that shows the kind of the reason why they never clamped down on what might be illegal pornography on this platform because of how he ran the place. It just, I mean, hopefully, with Elon in charge now, they're going to have a completely different system, one that's actually governed by rules and regulations, and one that actually follows the guidelines that they're supposed to follow under Section 230, because this is what they agreed to. The only reason why Twitter has been so, the government hasn't taken any action against it was because it acted against Donald Trump. Imagine if this was a different presidency, right? Clearly, everything that they're doing is wrong. So it's quite insane to see such a massive social media platform, arguably the most powerful social media platform, simply because world leaders use it and journalists use it, and this is where the news happens. For them to have such a lax system that's governed by feelings and emotions and not by standards, not actual standards.
Do you think Parag's take at the end and some of the last bits of the drop, Parag talking about, hey, this has gone a bit too far, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job of paraphrasing it. Do you think that even Parag and other executives realized that this kind of went too far?
I think they knew it went too far, but they just didn't care because clearly they banned Trump and they didn't do anything to unban him or anything like that. They just simply sat with their decision.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. They never unbanned him. A very good point.
Yeah, and they never, they applied the same rules, or rules in quotes here, on Trump, on other people as well. I mean, they tried to do the same thing to Lips of TikTok, right? For in the past few weeks, I mean, before Elon Musk took over, they suspended her 6 times. Over what?
Is
over
that
nothing.
so? This I was researching that one, Ian. Is that the account that was posting TikTok videos from people that were bisexual or trans or whatever? They were posting publicly, and then because I was listening to the All In podcast talk about this, and Jason debate this with Sachs. And so from memory, what they said was that these videos were already public. They were posting them, but the intention of posting them was to make fun of them. Now, I have a question for you. If those videos, and this is, I don't know the answer to this, it's a very tricky question, but if those videos were leading to people going to these people that posted those videos initially on TikTok, whatever, they go to them and start to harass them or threaten them, etc. Is that enough grounds to censor them?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, what happens when people call Elon Musk a terrorist or a Nazi? He's not censoring them, but what they're doing is essentially the same thing. I mean, they do the same thing to conservatives when they screenshot what conservatives are saying. I mean, there's like accounts like at Patriot Takes or whatever, like there's a host of them. There's a ton of these accounts. They do the same thing to the right. We don't complain about it. It's like, whatever's public is public, right? If you don't want people to criticize you, don't put your stuff up on TikTok and expect a safe space. It's ridiculous. And it's
so when
she's not like she's saying, hey, go harass these people.
I have another question. So let's say they post those videos, Lives of TikTok. They post the account posts those videos and says, let's go harass that person, or let's go give that person shit. Now I know you don't agree with this, and all of us don't agree that this should be done. If they did that, if an account did that, is that enough grounds for censorship or no? Still not. Because I know I had a debate with Vivek about this.
That would obviously be in violation of the terms of service. You're not supposed to harass people, right? You cannot direct harassment at anybody. Like explicit calls for harassment are very different from simply putting something out there. So this idea of stochastic terrorism can be applied any which way, right? And that's the concern, is they decided that when conservatives post something, it's for the purposes of harassing that person. It's like that is ridiculous. That means you can't criticize anybody, and they use this to stop people from talking about real issues, like, for instance, going after, like when I say going after, I mean like criticizing hospitals for performing transgender surgeries on minors. And this is something that they claim they don't do, and yet publicly they do it at the same time, right? Why are you not allowed to talk about it? Obviously, it makes people angry. Everything makes people angry. Anything can make people angry. But the idea that if a conservative posts it, therefore is dangerous to the lives of those people, well, that's ridiculous, first of all. And, all the stuff that they claim Lives of TikTok is responsible for, that she, that direction of, her posting of these videos, these publicly available videos, has led to the direct harassment and death threats towards these organizations, or even like a bomb threat to the Boston Children's Hospital, has later proven to be false. Like, there was no bomb threat to the hospital at all. It was just something that leftists blew up on social media and claimed was happening, wasn't actually happening, but they used that as a way to suspend her account temporarily. So I don't agree with that. Like if she was saying, "Hey guys, everybody needs to go to the hospital and set it on fire," then yeah, okay, that's fine. Like I think that should obviously be a bannable offense. You shouldn't be calling for violence at all. But she's not doing any of that, and most people are not engaging in this kind of activity. Most people are, if they do go to these places, they're peacefully protesting, as is their right as American citizens to protest anything they want. So the idea that you can suspend somebody because one individual might do something crazy, well, that is chilling speech, right? That's like saying you're not allowed to talk about certain issues. You can't criticize Dr. Fauci because somebody might do something. Like, how is that okay to suspend speech, to suspend criticism of legitimate issues because of something bad might happen? Like the law does not define something as something might happen. You have to actually fucking plan it. You have to actually do something for, to be prosecuted for it. So this idea that what you're saying could cause some crazy person somewhere to go and do something and use that as a means, as a justification to ban anyone from even talking about it, that is just pure censorship. And that is what they're doing to shut down any sort of conversation, any sort of criticism of any establishment organization. I mean, this is what caused Twitter to go and ban people for criticizing journalists. They claimed that was harassment because they changed their usernames to NPCs. Like that was leading to the harassment of journalists. No, it wasn't. Like, maybe don't publish stupid shit, and you should not be immune to criticism. Anybody should be able to say anything about anyone, as long as it's permitted within legal speech, and nothing that looks a TikTok post is illegal at all.
You are confusing legal
I
speech
want to highlight
and a private company continuously. This entire space is confusing.
Oh, sorry, I muted you by accident, Fidgetal. Can you continue? So you're confusing. Go ahead, Fidgetal.
You guys are confusing private speech versus public speech, and you are misleading thousands of people. If the question is whether there should be another platform that should be completely decentralized or run by the government, where these things are actually the legal arguments you're making, is very important. But I am tired of hearing over and over and over and over again from public officials, from people in the space. It is a private company that is allowed to do whatever they want with speech. So please clarify the difference between
I think Tom made it. So Tom,
or what they
just quickly, everyone, Tom, I know you were saying, so Fidgetal made a good point and we talked about it earlier. Then I want to go to Stephen, and then I brought Vivek to discuss censorship, because Vivek and Ian had a really good interaction last space, and I want to have them discuss it again. But Tom, I want you to comment on what Fidgetal just said. And you said it earlier about, yes, they are a private company, but they lied about their censorship, and that's something. And then there's of course the collaboration with the FBI is another the red flag.
Well, that's officials making a legal conclusion that a lot of many would dispute, especially in light of the facts and circumstances that we're seeing here. In some cases, private companies can be, for purposes of the First Amendment, limited public spaces that have certain requirements they have to follow. The question here is the government collusion? One other question here is the government collusion with the private corporation in terms of limiting the free speech rights of users of the corporation's product, such that the corporation, as I suggested earlier, becomes indistinguishable for the government for legal purposes. And I kind of go back to, I hope you've all read Animal Farm, but that famous image at the end of Animal Farm, remember? They look in on the party at the dinner, and the pigs are there with the humans, right? And the faces started morphing, so no one could tell the difference between one and the other. And I think that's what we have to see when we're looking at Twitter and the interactions with the FBI and DHS and these decision makings. There's not even a dotted line in terms of the operations here. And when you see language that Trump is a terrorist, his followers are terrorists, that is echoed almost immediately and simultaneously by DHS and FBI officials, it's further indication that this is a kind of a straight line from the government to the corporation in terms of censoring Americans, and it raises much more complex legal issues than my colleague on the panel here suggests. But that's my point. Thank you.
If I could
So
just
I-
add one
Thanks,
thing
Tom.
quickly.
I'll
Mario,
give
before
Prodigal
that-
Joy.
before-
Guys, just 2 minutes. So, Stephen, I know you've been waiting for a while, man. Prodigal Fidgeter, I'll give you the mic in a bit. Fidgeter, your mic is still very muffled, man. But Stephen, I know you've been waiting for a while, man. I really appreciate that. And I'll give you the mic. Then we'll go to Vivek and Ian. I've got a few questions for them. Stephen.
Yeah, no worries. Just 2 points that I wanted to make quick. I think just to dovetail what Ian's summary of this was, I think the overall point of this whole drop, in my opinion, one of the main focal points of this is to show that both of the executives, both Roth and Vijaya, were taking liberties and essentially making it up as it goes along, and applying new terms of service. They're literally just making up and curving according to what their predetermined biases were and applying them accordingly, despite even what some of the dissenters in their ranks were voicing. So I think the liberties at which they took with all of the terms of service are incredibly notable. Secondly, this idea that Twitter is a private company, was it a private company? If you're meeting with the FBI on a weekly basis and taking orders from them essentially to curate what speech is acceptable and what politicians should have a voice into what capacity, at that point, I mean, we as taxpayers, we fund the FBI, okay? So at what point, it gets pretty blurry then, in my opinion, between public and private. And so people have every right to be outraged for more than one reason in this regard. And I'd love to.
I mean, the FBI makes recommendations to companies all the time, though, and it's always up to the company to decide what to do. They never have to take an order from the FBI. So I don't think we can say the government was
A
forcing
recommendation
Twitter
is
to do
pressure.
anything.
It's pressure, right? I mean,
They
if the government is
regulate.
pressuring you to do
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
you
but
better do it.
but pressure that has no consequences.
Yeah,
if you
but Ed,
don't.
No,
let's
it's
talk
got
about
plenty of consequences. They're all very
let's talk
unspoken
about
consequences.
consequences. I can give you consequences right now. The government banned people from congregating and protesting against COVID restrictions and mandates in real life under the public safety state. Then the only means they had for information and for congregating was social media, where now it's clear there was collusion between big tech and the government to stifle free speech there. They offer broad immunity.
No,
to
but
big
there
tech
wasn't collusion, though.
No, there is collusion. There's 100% collusion.
They offered
collusion
broad
in that
immunity.
they made a suggestion.
They offered
made a
broad immunity to
recommendation.
big tech to be
There was
a
collusion.
platform, not a publisher. And then we find out that they are editorializing comment on issues that affect the constitutional rights of people when they cannot congregate in real life. They were arrested.
Absolutely
I know.
correct.
I was in New York. Parents were arrested trying to get their kids to school. I was in New York. People were protesting so they could keep their small businesses open to survive. So the government was literally violating their rights in real life, then working with big tech to make sure that their points in this information couldn't get out. Are you telling me that didn't exist?
And this also happened in the UK and in other countries where governments, which were initiating lockdowns, were basically telling the social media platforms to suspend these users. There's a lot of evidence for this. I mean, with the ongoing case between Missouri versus the Biden administration, they found out that the DHS was meeting with them, on a weekly basis. The FBI was meeting with them on a weekly basis to tell them, to give them recommendations on what to suspend and who to suspend. I mean, there are all these names that are listed, right? All these conservative accounts. The FBI is providing them names of all the so-called violation, tweets that were in violation of the COVID mandates. So 100%. I mean, this was stuff that was done from the top down. This wasn't just, Twitter deciding, oh, we're just going to start suspending people for speaking out against masks and lockdowns and things like that. No, this is actually done at the request of the NIH, right? The National Institutes of Health.
But
directly
it comes back to the fact that the government wasn't forcing anything. They were requesting it. They were suggesting it. And
they set up a platform.
They have undue pressure. They regulate these industries. They have billion-dollar contracts.
Give me a minute to land my claim. The FBI can come knock on your door and question you about anything they want. The FBI can knock on your door and question you about anything you like.
All right, guys, sorry. I think, Vivek, you can't hear Ed. So Ed, Vivek couldn't hear you. It's a bit of a glitch with Twitter, and I think everyone was speaking at the same time. So Ed, I'm going to bring you down and bring you back up just because that glitch is happening. I'll give the mic to Vivek in the meantime while I fix Ed's glitch. Go ahead, Vivek.
You able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
hear you.
we can hear you.
Go for it.
Cool. So let me just one of the points I made the other night was that we have 250 years worth of constitutional jurisprudence that takes some of the pressure off of us. How does it take the pressure off of us? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so I'm going to give you just two cases from the past, and then I'm going to bring it back to the present and hopefully clarify, I think some of the debate, I think good debate that I was just hearing. All right. So one case is a case called Bantam Books. This is up in the pre-internet era. There's a bookstore owner that wanted to sell a book. A local prosecutor showed up and said, I don't want you to sell the book. The bookstore owner said, thank you very much for that advice. You can pound sand. I'm going to sell the book. And then the prosecutor comes back and says, well, I might have something on you that is going to be troublesome for you. And I really recommend that you don't sell the book. So the bookstore owner stopped selling the book. A consumer who wanted to buy the book said that, you know what, this isn't the action of a private company, the bookstore owner's decision. It's a First Amendment issue. The Supreme Court agreed. Why was that? Because he was responding to the implicit threat of the prosecutor. It's a case called Bantam Books. Another case, and I'm going to tie this up in a second if people aren't seeing the connections immediately. There's the war on drugs in this country, okay? And what the federal government wanted to do was to search and seize drugs from every person who was, say, riding a railroad or crossing state lines, but they couldn't do it because there's a pesky thing in this country called the Fourth Amendment that requires you to have probable cause. So what did the government do? They passed a law. They said that, you know what, we, the government, aren't going to search you, but we're going to give immunity to any railroad company, private company, but we're going to give a special form of immunity that says that those railroad companies couldn't be sued under state law, under state tort law, if they, as the railroad private company, searched their passengers and searched their employees. That's not the government, that's just a private company doing it. We're just saying that that private company can't be sued in state court if a customer's unhappy about it. Supreme Court again says, not so fast. That's state action in disguise because you're using an inducement, like a relief from liability, to be able to do what the government couldn't do directly. Now, when you bring that into the present, that's exactly what's happening with social media companies. On one hand, you have companies like Twitter, as we now know, that are being explicitly and implicitly pressured by government actors, including the very government actors who can regulate and prosecute actors at those companies, combined with a special form of immunity. And keep in mind, many states in this country have viewpoint-based discrimination bans. They say that just like you can't deplatform somebody or discriminate against somebody because they're Black or gay or Muslim or whatever, you also can't deplatform them or discriminate against them because they're of a particular political persuasion. But what Section 230C2 does is it says that we're going to give you that special blanket of governmental immunity to be able to relieve yourself of liability from that state law, just like the railroad example that I gave earlier. So in a certain sense, I think there's sort of three categories here. First is there a constitutional issue? Is this a First Amendment violation? And the only issue that's relevant there is the federal government using a carrot and or a stick to get you to act in a certain way? I think the answer here is pretty clear. They were using both the stick, implicit and explicit threats, as well as the carrot of Section 230C2 immunity that protects them from being sued against state non-discrimination laws, which about half of states have in this country. The second question is, irrespective of whether there's a constitutional violation, is there a legal violation that goes beyond a constitutional one? My answer there again is yes. It is a different legal violation. It's called consumer fraud. What is the definition of consumer fraud? Telling consumers you are going to do one thing when in fact you are doing the opposite thing. What did they say? We are not engaged in shadow banning. We have fixed terms of service that we are merely applying. That's what they told all of you who were using Twitter. I don't think I was even, or I was barely on Twitter at this point in time, but that is what they were telling the general public for much of that time, when in fact they were doing a different thing. So that's not a constitutional violation. That's just old school fraud, telling users that you're doing one thing when in fact you're doing another. And then apart from all of the constitutional issues and the legal issues, is still just a fundamental issue, a societal and cultural issue, which is irrespective of the violations of the law. Is this how we want our culture to work? Is this the kind of culture we want to live in which the most powerful, elite, influential companies are using their power to silence voices? And this is the point I made the other day, is that is how you get January 6th. That is how you get, free speech didn't cause January 6th, despite what many will have you believe, but it might have prevented January 6th, 2021 from being what it was, because when you suppress people from speaking, that is when they resort to other means, including violence and tearing things down instead. And that's a cultural question that goes beyond the legal.
It's like
So,
a John F. Kennedy
sorry to
quote,
interject,
right?
but hopefully that
Can
was
I
useful.
can I
Yeah,
just say what I was trying to say previously?
sure.
So the FBI, we have no evidence that the FBI went to Twitter and threatened them with anything. You could say they implied it, but there's no evidence of that either. The FBI's job around the election time was to dispel misinformation about the election. So they provided facts to Twitter about voting machines, about vote by mail, and left it up to Twitter to decide what they wanted to do. Just like the FBI could come and knock on your door and say,
What do you think of what do you think of congressional pressure?
They don't have to. You don't have to answer these questions if you don't want to. You can call a lawyer, and then the FBI can. Then
Do they
provide
regulate
you with
these
a subpoena.
industries and award them billions upon billions in
There's
contracts?
congressional
I didn't cut
hearings
anyone else
whenever
off.
people.
Can I just finish, Ian, please?
Yeah.
So the FBI can ask you any questions you want. You can hire a lawyer if you want. You don't have to answer those questions. There could be consequences, but that's entirely up to you. The FBI, or let's just take an example, a normal police officer in your town pulls you over and says, "Hey, John, you really shouldn't be hanging out in this neighborhood. It's nothing but trouble." That doesn't mean you can't hang out in the neighborhood, but it's a suggestion by the police not to hang out in that neighborhood. You can still do it. It's still up to you. And unless there's actual implicit forcing Twitter saying, if you don't ban these posts or ban these people or censor these posts, we're going to, prosecute you to the fullest extent. Then, there's some issues there.
It exists. What do you think when Senator Warren starts threatening Twitter with censorship, and she's saying that we need to regulate these industries because they're promoting misinformation, what do you think that causes Twitter to do when they get a call from the FBI?
Didn't Trump also meet with Jack Dorsey, though, and try and pressure him into doing things?
I don't know. Maybe, but it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't sit right by me
look,
if that's true. Either way,
we
it
had
doesn't matter who's
reporting.
doing it.
We had reporting out of Just the News confirming and detailing the testimony of this FBI special agent out in San Francisco. I think Mr. Chan, I think his name is.
Yeah, Elvis Chan.
That these requests by the FBI to censor Americans were vetted by the highest levels of the FBI before being sent to Twitter and other social media companies. That is plain wrong. It is not the job of the FBI to tell private companies what's up and what's down about political debates about elections. It's not their job. It's a violation. Hold on a second. It's a violation of the law and internal FBI and DOJ regulations, the Privacy Act, other laws related to civil rights for the FBI to start investigating someone based on First Amendment protected speech and then take action against that citizen with the third party here, the corporation, Twitter or Facebook or anyone else. Just because Twitter had choices after that communication with the FBI does not give the FBI an out. The FBI had no business monitoring material about election debates in this context.
The FBI's job is to monitor misinformation and
no, it isn't their job. That's not their job. They're an investigative agency. They're an investigative agency to investigate criminal activity. They're not. Their job isn't to monitor information. That's not made.
Sorry, excuse me, guys. So Ian and Vivek, go ahead, guys, and then we'll go to Ed.
I was just gonna say that there may not be as much disagreement with what I believe it was Ed who was speaking, who was saying, if we also contextualize this in terms of not just looking after what the FBI's relationship was, which, by the way, all of the facts have not yet come to light. I'm eager to see what further facts do. But when you contextualize that in the context of, say, Senator Richard Blumenthal, who effectively plans and promises retribution, to say that if you don't, actually, he specifically asked about silencing Trump before Trump was actually removed from the platform. He asked about if Trump denies the result of the election, what are you going to do? And if you don't do it, we're going to have to regulate you. We're going to have to take a look at anti-monopolistic protections. We're going to have to come back with regulatory legal retribution if you don't take these steps. And that's not just Blumenthal. It's Senator Warren. It's a number of other legislators. now against the backdrop of a law that's already been passed that protects these companies from state laws that protect them within the context of federal immunity. And by the way, you know, we can take the FBI example and put that to one side. Take the Alex Berenson example. Alex Berenson was removed from Twitter. Why? Because White House officials repeatedly met with Twitter officials to specifically direct them not to remove a particular kind of person, but to remove this specific person in the White House, where the president is the leader of the executive branch of this government. That White House met in the White House with officials from a private company and named a specific private citizen who happened to be a critic of the government and told them to remove him. And how do we know it had an influence? Because as Elon and others have released, actually, this is actually before Elon took over, it was released in the discovery proceedings of Alex Berenson's lawsuit that they were frightened of that pressure applied to them. They thought there was going to be retribution, and they actually responded directly to it. So in the context of that, the FBI pressure, to whatever extent it was, is one piece of a broader mosaic that paints a clear picture of a government that was applying its full toolkit of pressure, from regulatory to statutory to the White House to the police force, causing companies to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have done. And I know these are complicated issues to see through, but one easy litmus test to always use, and Ian and I are on the same side of this today. We were on the opposite sides of an issue the other night, but it's the easy filter to sort of take on is put the other side, put the shoe on the other foot. And would you see the constitutional problem? And I have little doubt that if it was President Trump in a Republican-controlled Congress doing the exact same thing in reverse, many on the left would instantly see the constitutional problem, maybe even more quickly than those on the right, because these are classically left-wing concerns about government overreach in combination with the private sector. But I think that's a good litmus test for smoking out whether there's a first principles constitutional issue that's apart and above and beyond the preferences of who we might or might not want to see removed. So that's all I wanted to add there.
There's also that list, the COVID-12, the 12 people who the DHS had identified, you know, the Disinformation Governance Board before it was canceled, identified as being the most prolific posters of anti-vax, anti-lockdown, anti-masking measures that they wanted suspended from social media. They claimed that these individuals, these 12 people, which included Alex Berenson and a bunch of other people who have been suspended. Many of them have been reinstated on Twitter, but are still banned on Facebook. They claim that these individuals were chiefly responsible for so-called disinformation in the country. And this is entirely protected speech, mind you. This is all protected by the First Amendment. And they were claiming that these individuals were endangering public safety and that action had to be taken against them by social media companies, and with the implicit threat that if these companies did not take any action against these individuals, the full force, right, the full pressure of the legislative body would come down against them and demonopolize them. So that is a threat that these social media companies had to act on for their own self-interest. And when that happens, right, you can't even blame the social media companies for acting on it, because there is that threat that they are going to be hammered and completely destroyed by the government.
Well, you know, and to Vivek's point, I raised this issue during the Trump administration publicly. I highlighted the idea that this was corporate fraud. The big tech companies were lying. They were engaged in misconduct with respect to consumers and shareholders and such. The FTC, SEC, the Justice Department, all could have investigated it. But, you know, they were anti-Trumpers for the most part in those agencies that are running them, and they didn't want to do anything about it. And I think it's another failure of our leadership here in Washington, D.C., frankly, of both parties, because we should expect honesty and commitment to the rule of law from both of them, to refuse to hold these corporations and their allies in the government, executive branch agencies, and frankly, within Congress, accountable for these abuses of power. I think the silence of the Republican leadership on this these extraordinary disclosures show you that politics infects this in more ways than you might imagine, because there are a lot of Republicans on the Hill who don't like Trump, and they don't care much when he's victimized. And as a result, the rest of us get victimized because these policies were being used to destroy the right of free speech and the right to access information on these platforms for millions of Americans.
And
So
Tom,
I just want to chime in for a second and
Can I pop
ask
in
a quick
here?
question to Vivek, and then I'll I want to take a step back, and I'm
ahead.
quite curious. I think what Tom said there is very important, which is that this is notably muted here in Washington from not just the ones that you would expect it to be, the ones that have, shall we say, supported the prevailing narrative of the Democrats or whatever, certain type, certain community, but also those on the right, which is quite interesting. So it talks about, establishment, those who are within the system, and those who we think of perhaps as being on the fringes of what most people would vote for or something, hypothetically, right? But Vivek, there's a question I have for you then, and I'm curious for other people's thoughts as well. But so, okay, we have a situation now where there is a private company that has abused and overextended itself in the fray of political discourse and, influenced or attempted to directly influence a general election. But what's the answer then? What is the solution? That we give greater autonomy for the government to come in and make it a public good, make a private enterprise a public service? But then that's still going to have this concern of overextended sort of hands of the state influencing people and our way of looking at things. So how do we balance, therefore, the ability for private enterprises to do what they want in theory and lie about it or be fraudulent, but equally not ensure that it's then, have a public sector entity that, can abuse that as well? So I'm just curious
it's a
how
great
you
question.
address that.
You criminally prosecute them when they break the law. That will fix it.
It's actually pretty. Yeah, I'm mostly with Tom on that. Is just apply the existing legal framework that applies to private companies that are law-abiding. And so there's a few different North Stars here. One is, if you're coordinating with the government, responding to their threats and protected by their inducements, that is actually already state action in disguise. It's not that the government took over through the front door and nationalized it. It's that the government nationalized it effectively through the back door. Then we have to actually recognize that the company is bound by the same constraints as the government if it's just an avatar of government. The second is just applying the rules as they exist. I mean, consumer fraud is consumer fraud. I don't care if it's Sam Bankman-Fried or if it's someone else. If you tell consumers you're doing one thing, when in fact you're doing another, that is a violation of basic fraud statutes. And then as it relates to elections in particular, there are a lot of laws in this country. In fact, Trump was facing in 2016 in the Stormy Daniels incident, he was in the receiving end, the defensive end of a similar kind of claim of constructive corporate campaign contributions. I can't imagine a more effective mechanism, a larger amount of money that someone could have donated to help Joe Biden's campaign more than the help provided by suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story. That's a constructive campaign contribution, arguably at least. And so I think that applying existing law combined with the no state action in disguise principle gets us there. Now, I know that we're so worked up about the Twitter example because I am too, but it's sort of clear and present today. I'm just going to give you another example, though, to really show what the precedent-setting, I would say, downward spiral that we're seeing of how government actually begins to do its work through the private sector in a different area that's closer to my professional day job, which is what's going on with, let's just say, the climate agenda. Okay, so the Green New Deal could not be passed through Congress. One of the things that many of you may not know is that most big banks have voluntarily, at John Kerry's behest, and this is not a conspiracy theory or something, John Kerry mostly boasted about this, met with banking CEOs of nearly every major banking institution in this country, and they've all signed the so-called climate pledge, which actually voluntarily commits those banks to not fund Arctic drilling or the kinds of activities that otherwise would have been legal to fund, but for the Green New Deal not passing. So the Green New Deal would have banned it, didn't pass. Instead, the government, through John Kerry and the climate czar, gets them to be pressured to sign that climate pledge. Now, is that really the action of a private company? You could say that it was just a request, but these big banks are not charitable institutions. You have to ask what they're getting in return and or what pressure is being applied on them, keeping in mind that as recently as 2008, these were the same banks that were indeed bailed out by the government and know where they need to go when times go bad. And so for me, when you think about, it's not just a big tech issue. It's a question of who actually rules the country. Is it the people who we elect to run the government, or is it somebody else other than the people who we elect to run the government, which increasingly includes actors in the private sector? And I think a good first principle to be on the list of actions, it's not a sexy item, but it's a list, it should be on the to-do list, month one to-do list of whoever sits in the White House next. Heck, I'd be happy if the guy currently sitting in the White House did this too. I don't think he's going to. But if the next guy or gal, whoever it is, on their to-do list in that first month is to say that, you know what, in the federal government, I want to expose to the public every instance over the last 4 years in which there was public pressure, governmental pressure applied to get a private company to do something that the government itself was stopped from doing, either by the Constitution or by the lawmaking process or by the regulations that bind government. And I suspect what we are going to find is that you roll that log over, there's going to be a lot more than Twitter related FBI censorship that crawls out. There's going to be a lot more than the climate pledge example that crawls out. And I worry that what we see here is really just the tip of an iceberg that runs much deeper, that should alarm and make the hairs on the back of every liberal and every conservative alike stand up, to reveal the illusion that we actually live in a democratic self-governing society when the constraints we put on that government are in fact being evaded every day. And what we're seeing in this debate about Twitter and free speech is just one more embodiment of the way the government is getting increasingly private actors to do its dirty work while evading the constraints we put on that government. So anyway, thanks for having me. I'm gonna hop
The
off.
only thing I'll add to that, Vivek, is I posted it up top. That isn't Breitbart. It isn't Fox News. That's Biden, because he's unable to pass the Green New Deal, pushing multinational corporations to pursue these ESG and net zero policies. You know, there's a reason why the too big to fail banks were never trust busted. Big tech has not been trust busted. They have alliances with the government. They get the Fed bailouts to control the money, and they are managing to backdoor policies on the American people, affecting their life, affecting their ability to buy groceries, etc., without the popular will of the people. So I agree 100%.
But so Vivek, I know
Can I
Susie's got. Yeah, jump in, Susie.
thank you so much. I try to be patient and I try to be polite by not just interrupting. So let's look at some real harms that may have been done, that I'm pretty sure have been done, and possibly with the collusion of the government. We've seen the censorship when it came to election integrity and censoring and suspending right conservatives on this platform. Let's look at the physicians that were raising the alarm bells for the last 2 years about what's been going on with COVID. They've literally been taken off of Twitter, shadow banned, blacklisted, removed. All of us have faced that. As a nurse, this is so disturbing to me, because I look at this and I think, how many millions, not thousands, not hundreds, how many millions of people were harmed by these vaccines because this social platform, possibly in collusion with the NIH, Dr. Fauci, everybody else in this government, these people may not have died if it wasn't for the censorship that went on this and other platforms.
I would go, Sassi. I would go because this is a very sensitive topic, and I want to make sure that the panels, we have a well-equipped panel to touch on it, because we are talking about something that involves people's lives. So we're gonna do that panel in 2 days. It's on my profile. I've pinned it as well, and it's above as well for anyone that wants to set the reminders to do that discussion about COVID, because it is a extremely sensitive topic, and that kind of leads to the question I have for you, Vivek. When it comes to something like COVID, which is such a touchy subject, where is censorship needed, and where does it go too far when it's something that can impact people's lives? As
So
in,
look,
not
we
lives,
have
generally,
laws,
not impact their lives, but get life or death type decisions.
So we have laws about commercial fraud in this country. We can debate whether or not some of those laws need to be tweaked, but they are what they are. Okay, you can't sell something that says it's going to cure cancer when in fact it will cause you to die of cancer instead. So that regime already exists governing commercial speech. Short of that, I do not think we should have and should be going forward engaged in censorship about public debate surrounding any scientific topic, and I don't think COVID gets a special exemption. I personally believe that when you look at the totality of health consequences, including non-COVID health consequences of policies such as school lockdown policies, such as, general lockdown policies, as well as school closures, I think even the emerging scientific consensus today includes, I think, an admission that many of those decisions were ill-fated in retrospect. Does that mean that people made are to be faulted for making the right or wrong decisions in real time when they were in the first wave of the pandemic trying to understand what was going on. No, that's not the point. But the point I'm making is we would have gotten to those answers more quickly had we allowed free speech and open debate to actually settle the score on those questions. And instead, we had a culture of fear perpetuated by the risk of being censored or silenced. A lot of what Jay Bhattacharya had to say was actually, I think, vindicated in the end, but it took us longer to get to even the right answer for the very goals of advancing public health itself. And this is where I come down on the question of violence. It is where I come down on the question of public health, that the pro-censorship camp or the pro-speech moderation camp worries authentically. Like I would say this, I'm not critiquing these people in their intentions, not all of them at least, but authentically think that it's a trade-off between free speech, which is this value that matters, but we have to trade it off in virtue of public health, that we have to trade it off sometimes in virtue of preventing violence. I make the opposite claim, which is that it's not that free speech is in tension with science. Free speech is a precondition for the pursuit of truth through science. It's not that we need to weigh the risk of free speech versus a violent incident on January 6th at the Capitol. It is that actually, what was it not for free speech? Censorship may have actually been the cause of repressed speech that instead causes greater violence. And so that's where I'm at on it, is that I don't think that this is delicate. I think it is, I view it as indelicate, Mario, with all due respect, is that free speech and open debate is the way, not just for freedom, but even for the pursuit of truth through science itself, for the pursuit of science to advance public health interests and the very interests that we're supposedly weighing against free speech. Almost all the time, free speech is actually going to be the better way of advancing those very interests themselves.
You have to join the discussion we have about COVID.
Yeah.
I'll give it to Tom. I'll give the mic to Tom.
Yeah,
But make sure
Mario,
you're there if I can do this. Go ahead, Tom.
Look, you can't separate the FBI from the CDC in terms of being a bad actor in these debates. I kind of overstate that for effect here. But the public health agencies are no more reliable in terms of policing discussions about so-called public health than the FBI is reliable about policing discussions about election debates. We've had interference in our right to discuss major policy issues about how we live our lives based on government interference and collusion with these companies. And there was no scientific rationale for it. It was a political rationale. And now we're finding out, as Judicial Watch has gotten out documents and others have gotten out documents about what was going on in these agencies, they were lying. So it wasn't like they were even operating in good faith. They had a political agenda that was at disagreement with the agenda or the approach that others had suggested as a result of their scientific background. And they abused their authority to work with corporations to shut this debate down in a way that was dangerous. And if there's anything I hope we learn from this debate is that the whole public health establishment is largely rotten to the core. And the same way we need to rebuild back up our federal law enforcement authorities to the degree it's even necessary or warranted or something we want to do. Boy, we need to take a second look at the way the deep state public health agencies operated to destroy our First Amendment and, as we heard earlier, to destroy and harm lives.
So I've got a question for Tom, Ian, and Ed. So this is from the audience. Audience, if you want to ask your questions, bottom right corner. Question: why do we believe that the CEO had nothing to do with the Trump ban? So we're talking about Jack Dorsey, and there's a common theme that he was pressured to do it. Yeah, I do want to say he did give the okay for that final decision by the looks of it.
I think he did probably have something to do with it. I mean, he is a CEO, so he can't escape blame from that.
Ian, would you agree with that point?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that point 100%. I think that if anything, it showed how hands off he was on the whole situation. You just let other people deal with it. And as Elon himself has stated, it would seem that Yoel Roth was the real CEO because he was the one making all the calls, whereas Jack was off on a vacation, right? He just didn't want to deal with it. It just shows that he had no power, no real control over his company, and he didn't want anything to do with his company, which speaks volumes of him as a leader, as his ability as a leader. It's just sad. It's just sad that he would be so hands off on a company that is just going to hell under his watch. It's an
I want to
indictment.
know. I personally want to know what our current president's take is on all of this. I personally want to know what the current sitting president thinks of the previous president being wrongfully suspended, even though now we know clearly that he did not break any of Twitter's rules. I want to know his thoughts. I want to know how, Joe Biden would feel if he were suspended from Twitter. I think that any United States president should be against the thought of a sitting president being wrongfully censored, suspended, and shut down from being able to communicate with their supporters.
Tara, he doesn't even know what day it is, so I doubt he would have any opinion on what's going on.
Well, he supports the censorship of Trump. He wants to ban him from running for office. His campaign sought to suppress information that benefited him. I mean, we found out in California his PR operation was working with the Secretary of State's office to take down tweets and content that questioned the changes in the elections and disputes about the election processes. He and his people are up to his neck in censoring material. And obviously, when you announce that you want Elon Musk investigated over essentially his free speech efforts here, pretending there is a national security issue, we're in dire territory in terms of Republican form of government when we have a president talking like that. He's made it quite clear he's on the wrong side of the Constitution on this.
So what about other individuals like, say, Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo, or those that were part of the administration but perhaps weren't as okay with what was happening at the time?
I missed the first part of your question.
What about others like Mike Pence then, who wasn't exactly, he still attended Biden's inauguration. There was, some considerations about Mike Pence's positioning on what happened on Jan 6th. So what do you say about those members of the Republican Party that are, not as aligned on this and Trump and so on? Just curious.
Well, Pence is running against Trump, practically speaking. Other members, there are other members of, his former administration, such as Pompeo's, are also running against him. And, there's got to be, if I were them, playing political advisor to people who don't want my advice, I would be really quite outraged at what happened here. They've expressed discomfort with it, obviously, and they oppose it, from my understanding. But there's a big, this to me is a crisis. We're in the Great Suppression. This is the biggest challenge to the First Amendment in history. You'd have to go back to the early part of the last century with the World War I laws designed to suppress this, dissent to see anything comparable. But unlike that, we've got this almost uniform establishment opposition to First Amendment and free speech that we've really never seen before in our nation's history. It's disturbing.
Did you see what happened to anyone who didn't essentially cut ties and turn their backs on Trump? Did you see what they effectively did to those people? I mean, it's pretty logical for Pence, if he planned on running in the future, to go with the way of the sentiment. And it's easy to drive sentiment when you're banning and suspending anyone who has a differing opinion. So, and this is why I continue to say this was interference with the election, because by doing that, they were able to make it seem as though everyone was voting for Biden. Everything was, geared toward Biden, because anyone who was against what was happening was getting shut down.
And as we heard from Sebastian Borka, sorry, Mario.
That's right, Brax. I was going to ask Ian a question. Ian, I want to go to you, man, to prepare us for the next drop, which is going to be based on COVID. And I've got a few questions on you because it's a very sensitive topic, and you tend to be very, very objective on things in most cases. So I appreciate getting your thoughts on this. Where do you think this could head? Like, how far could the censorship go on? Do you think it's going to be worse than what we had in the elections from what you've read? Because I know you're pretty deep into all this. And what's your
Yeah,
take on the whole COVID
I
censorship
think
situation?
that it might actually provide a lot of information about the government's collusion with social media platforms, in particular Twitter, and how it used they violated First Amendment rights of a lot of Americans, and it's going to provide a lot of ammunition for members of the House as well as the Senate to go after people like Dr. Fauci, which is why we see Elon Musk publicly tweeting "prosecute Fauci," right? And he wouldn't be putting that out there just to get some likes. He can tweet anything and you get a bunch of likes for it, right? So I think that it's definitely going to be very, very juicy. I think it's going to be very spicy, even, and it's going to it's going to reveal the extent to which the government, right, the NIH, suppressed public speech, right, protected speech from being expressed on social media by leaning on these social media companies, by leaning on Twitter in a way that allowed them to put out just a singular narrative that suppressed everybody else. So I think that's going to be a big deal. I think we're going to see a lot of people who were suppressed during this time be vindicated as well.
So my next question for you, man,
Is it true? No, sorry, Mario. I was just going to ask. I was just seeing Elon Musk responding to a tweet from Mike Solana saying it's a screen shot of verified accounts. It says this is a legacy verified account. It may or may not be notable.
Yeah, that's real.
And then
Mine says
Elon says the wording is mine. That's wild. And he
That's
said
hilarious.
that
Yeah.
he said that he did that because he's planning on removing all legacy blue checks because the way in which they were given out was corrupt and nonsensical.
Yeah, you could pay $15,000, and this is something that you can verify if any member of the crypto space. They were, encouraged to pay money to basically bribe Twitter employees who kept the money for themselves to be notable, quote unquote, right? And a lot of the times, these Twitter employees would go to bars and clubs and stuff and just give it to DJs there because they wanted some clout locally, right? So you can literally go to google.com and type in Twitter verified account. I want to buy it. You want to buy it. You can buy it for like $50, $500, whatever people are charging for all these hacked accounts, essentially, that would just they were just given blue check marks. They were not notable people. I know some people who got blue check marks because they claimed to have faced harassment. That's how some people that I know, right, some leftist activists got blue check marks. It's not because they are notable individuals or because they're journalists or anything like that, but because they could claim that they were being impersonated. And that alone was enough to get a lot of people blue check marks, just because it shows that you're verified. And if you can, at the time, there was a previous policy, it was unspoken policy, that if you were notable enough to be parodied by other people, that would entitle you to a blue check mark. It's kind of crazy. So I'm glad he's getting rid of the legacy check marks and that you'll have to pay for it moving forward. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's
Can I just also
wild.
say,
I love the wording.
Yeah, it's a lot of people are taking issue with it. They're feeling offended because they think they're special. They're not. None of us is special. We're all a bunch of special snowflakes, all as unique as each other.
Just going back to the next material related to COVID, obviously Musk has highlighted the importance here, and I think his criticisms of Fauci, he probably knows or sees what's coming. But Twitter, compared, as we've talked about before, compared to Facebook and YouTube and Google, is really small potatoes. And TikTok is another animal altogether that's run the way the left wants Twitter to be run by the Chinese communists. But right now on YouTube, if I were to make a video talking about the 2020 election, they would vandalize the post with something going back to Wikipedia talking about the 2020 election. If I were to say on YouTube that voter fraud had a material impact on the election outcome, they would take the video down. If I mention COVID on either platform, Facebook makes it harder and intercedes and labels and vandalizes the content to make it harder to share, even if I'm talking about documents the government gave us on COVID. So you really do have this weight of suppression and censorship that's ongoing at Google and YouTube, which affects billions of more people than Twitter does. I mean, Twitter has an outsized influence because of its user base, the nature of it, and the policy-centered and media community focused on it. But in terms of the average everyday person, Google and Meta are doing much more in the way of censorship and suppression. And if I were Elon Musk, I'd be calling up my competitors over there and say, you need to be honest here, because I found corporate corruption here, and you're sitting on it too, and you need to call it out. And this is the approach we need to take. We can't pretend this is a policy debate. This is a debate of corporate and government wrongdoing that needs to be exposed, and it's as corrupt as anything we're hearing about from that guy in the Bahamas.
Wait, Tom, could I ask you just to kind of build off of your idea of Google and YouTube reaching these tremendous volumes? Now, all the heat and all the attention is directed at Elon Musk, and counterintuitively, it's directing a lot of traffic to Twitter. So do you think that that statistic or that reach and volume is just going to shift, and eventually, because everybody is starting to post the truth, like the real truth on Twitter, do you think that that could potentially jeopardize YouTube and Google and Facebook and all of their tremendous reach in spreading lies about everything that we've been hearing about for 2 years?
Well, maybe for some political activist types, but Musk obviously has goals in that regard. Twitter is pretty awful for those who aren't really involved in politics to come in and talk about policy. I mean, you have to have thick skin to participate. Certainly, if you're, if you've got a little bit of attention on the site, you're going to be attacked in ways that are extremely unpleasant. And normal people are probably unlikely to want to do that. They might want to look at it, but they may not want to participate. Facebook still has a lot of, very light, activity in that regard, comparatively speaking, in terms of activity people can participate in. That doesn't make it feel like they're they're going to be viciously attacked because they post a picture of their grandkids or their dog.
Yeah, but Facebook is starting to suffer. They're starting to hemorrhage money, especially with Zuckerberg's failed endeavor to make the metaverse. It's being outcompeted by its own subsidy, Instagram. And the thing that Twitter stands out between Facebook and Instagram is because they're primarily because it's like a microblogging website. Everybody can see the information that you put out there. Whereas, Facebook, you need to be friends with somebody in order to see, what's going on in their life. So it's more appealing. It's more open.
Facebook is a big ship. Google's a big ship. They both will continue to proceed ahead, and they could lose a lot of money or a lot of users and still keep plowing along, relatively speaking. So I don't want to overstate the, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just highlighting the fact, because they are so big and because their censorship is so widespread and dangerous, we have got to focus on what they're doing now in league with this government.
Okay, all right.
Just for the audience, sorry, I'm eating. If you know anyone that worked at censorship or whatever the department is called at Meta, Google, old Twitter, X or existing, please, or any other big social platform, including TikTok, please hit me up. I'm going to make a tweet about it. Because I want to understand, especially someone from Twitter or Meta. We've had a lot of people leak information on the show during the FTX saga and beyond. I want to see if we can get someone to leak something. They can do it anonymously using another account. We can create an account for them, and they can come in and leak, hopefully leak information from Meta censorship, because we've spoken to people privately that said that Meta is not too different. Obviously, we're not going to find out about it considering it's a public company, but the same issue applies there. They've got a lot of the same processes that they use for censorship. So it'll be interesting to see how much human bias, how big of a role it plays at Meta, and how, if someone's in the audience right now that can talk about it, do put your hand up or DM me as well. We can bring you up now. Otherwise, we can bring you up in a separate show. I want to go to Piotr. Piotr, a different take on it. What are your thoughts on the drop? What's your thoughts on the drop so far? And what do what are your expectations when it comes to COVID? What happened and what should happen? Like, what does censorship have any place to do with avoiding the spread of misinformation? I'll give you an example, Piotr. Let's just say because determining what is misinformation is really difficult. Let's just say 100% of doctors agree that something is bad. Okay, obviously it never happens, but let's say 100% of them agree. If someone's posting about it, claiming that it's actually not bad, it's actually good, should that be censored? Is that, and I'm giving an extreme example of a topic that's a lot more murky, which is COVID, but is that, if all the doctors agree that this is misinformation, is that something that should be censored? Or no, free speech, as Vivek said, is part of what makes us human. You cannot censor anything unless it crosses boundaries such as inciting violence or child pornography, etc.
I don't think there's ever going to be a case where 100% of the doctors
I know.
agree
I know.
on something.
It's never gonna be that case. And like I'm not talking about COVID here for anyone listening, because I know it's too complicated. There's way too many theories to go through in this space, and that's for in 2 days' time we'll do that. But Ed, my question is, if there is, it's theoretically, like, is there a place where misinformation should be censored when it comes to people's lives?
I mean, I think
I don't think it's fair. Really
from
quick,
most
I have to
people.
say, I'm sorry, Mario. I don't think it's fair to equate misinformation about COVID being spread to child pornography like that. That is totally two different things, two different levels of wrong. As far as people raising questions or even spreading misinformation, I don't think that should be equated to other things that are being censored and removed from Twitter.
I mean, like, so what if
No, so I'm
somebody...
not I'm not comparing the two. So I'm talking here purely about misinformation to do with medical misinformation, which again, I'm not talking about COVID either. I just want to make it very clear. I don't want to open that kind of worm.
Yeah.
I'm
Like,
talking
I
in
think I
general.
know. I think I know what you're saying. So, like, what if somebody says drinking bleach is going to cure COVID? Should that be removed or not? In my opinion, there's definitely grounds to censor that. At least, use some kind of community note system to make sure that people know that that shouldn't be done. But like, I think that would be the closest to somebody to you saying, what if there's 100% certainty that this isn't going to work?
To Ed's
Go ahead,
point,
Max.
yeah, thank you. To Ed's point, and maybe to help answer and hopefully even help us get a productive space in a couple of days, we have to, anytime it's human nature, if we start with disagreements, if we start with arguments, it's going to continue that way. If we can find common ground at the beginning of a discussion like this with all sides, it may not be much common ground, but if we can find a few points that we all agree on and then go from there, I believe we're going to have a much more productive conversation overall. Is bleach bad? Most likely. Let's use our common sense on that. Most people would agree you don't drink bleach, right? So we go from there, and if there's somebody who disagrees with me, that's fine. But I would think that most people would agree you don't drink bleach. And then you go from there and you say, okay, what are the obvious things in their opinion, those things that we can agree on? What are the common ground, and how, and then move on to those more difficult topics like, is the vaccine bad? Is it good? Is it, I feel like that's very important if we're going to have a productive conversation in this arena.
Yeah, and I think community notes, what Elon Musk is doing, is a great way to kind of allow the community to decide what's accurate and what is not. Like, vaccines, a lot of people, there's plenty of people who say, you shouldn't get the vaccines, just as many that say you should. But the facts around the vaccine, I think community notes could go a long way in helping people to see all the facts in regards to vaccines.
So it goes back to offering transparency rather than censorship. I think it's a good place to, and I'll give the mic to Piotr and Asia to kind of give their final thoughts. But while they're doing this, just for the audience, tomorrow we have the pleasure, the honor, whatever you want to say, to have Mark Andreessen on the show. If you don't know who Mark Andreessen is, Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z, he's the co-founder. So highly recommend you set your reminders for that. It's pinned above, and it's on my profile as well. And then in 2 days, we have craziness coming to the show. We do have medical doctors that you all would know, including a board member at Pfizer. We have someone who's anti-vaccines, as you see all over TV, that will come in and discuss these very heated topics as we prepare for the next files to drop. So there's 2 events. They're both on my profile. They're both pinned above. Make sure you set your reminders. It's taking us a lot of time to get those panelists to join us. It's going to be a really interesting space. Piotr, I'll give you the mic while everyone sets their reminders.
Yeah, funny. You asked me and then Ed came in. So, history has taught us that the capacity for information to be manipulated is one of the biggest threats that we across the world, not just in one country, as a society faces. And I think that more than ever, you see disinformation, misinformation, censorship at the forefront of many people's minds, be them in democratic, autocratic, or somewhere in the middle. Clearly, suppressing the information or the perspectives of certain people, even if they're not that extreme, is extremely problematic, undermining what the values that you push to preach, and ultimately counterproductive, because you lead to greater isolation, you lead to greater divergence, and as I said before, the center ground whereby people are supposed to generally congregate, the silent majority, they don't. They go to the fringes. Look at Germany in 1920s. After the First World War, we had people going to the communists, and we had people going to a certain party known as the Nationalist Socialist Party, even though they were obviously the fascists and eventually Hitler. So in this context, we need to remember that it's wrong for any public entity, particularly one as influential as Twitter, to have such an amount of power. Now, I don't agree with much of what's been said here. I appreciate in the principle, which is about the protection of freedom of speech, and that it's about engagement. It's not about isolation. And I think Tom has said some great points. I haven't agreed with all of it. I think Ian has said some great points. I think Prodigal's been extremely impassioned, and I think it's fantastic. So, I think I remain cautiously optimistic in terms of what this platform can become if we can continue to see certain things. When it comes to Facebook or other major platforms, for example, I think it's absolutely absurd that people who even question one specific, questioning the documents that are about the issue being published by the, prevailing government, are suddenly like, there's such a, this is the other element that we need to keep in mind, which is automation. Automation that a lot of these mega multinationals use, therefore just blanket, there's a COVID thing on this, be careful. And it's like, guys, I'm looking at the documents that were published by the government about COVID, and now you're saying that it may have disinformation or something. There needs to be a greater ability to ridicule this information without us immediately going to sort of a overly protective status. So I think it's been a good conversation.
I want to say, Piotr, just want to interrupt you. Just want to say there's one point you made about misinformation is getting more and more dangerous as well. So I understand the need, and I just realized we all forgot that deep fakes. If anyone doesn't know what deep fakes are, definitely Google it. In the next few years, you'll be able to make a video of me or anybody speaking in that video and saying whatever you like. So you can actually make a video of President Biden or ex-President Trump or whatever, and they can say something like, we will be attacking China because they declared war on us, something as extreme as that, or this is going to be illegal, something crazy. And that video will look real. And imagine a video like this spreading like crazy on a platform like YouTube or like Twitter or like Facebook. Is that what do you think, Tom?
It's almost as bad as the New York Times and the Washington Post all reporting that Trump colluded with Russia. Variation of the challenge that is seemingly as credible.
Yeah,
and in some ways it's easy. In some ways it's even worse because there are technical at least currently you technically can or more easily find out if something's obviously fraudulent. It's harder to do that with a fake news story that has unattributed sources smearing and defaming public officials.
50 intelligence officials, right? That's how they promoted the narrative that the Hunter Biden laptop story was fake. And so, you know, we can be as concerned as we want to be with deepfakes, and there are ways to track deepfakes down. I think Facebook's Meta AI is able to actually undo the deepfakes to find out who's actually behind the images, or at the very least, figure out what software was used to produce the deepfakes. So I'm not super concerned with deepfakes. I think the bigger concern here is the mainstream media itself pushing disinformation and then claiming it's the truth. I mean, like, who's holding them accountable? Well, absolutely nobody, right? I mean, we have us on Twitter. We can complain as much as we want, and we can be concerned about deepfakes and so on. But what about the mainstream media? What about the lies that they put out there? In particular regard to Ukraine, for instance, where they're literally pushing Ukrainian disinformation about war crimes and so on. They can fire shells into cities in Donetsk and then blame the Russians for it. Why would the Russians shell their own cities? That is never explained. Right? And they call it a false flag. The Russians are attacking themselves. Well, Ukraine has been bombing the place for 8 years now. So it's like, you know, as much as a concern it could be, you know, it could pose with this disinformation produced by, you know, state agents or whatever. It's like, what about the mainstream media and what it's already doing? You know, I mean, what it's already doing is arguably even worse because they have credibility and they don't seem to care about the fact that they're putting out lies every single day.
I think it's a good place to
And
end
also,
it.
if
Because go ahead. I'm going to end it, bro. I'm going to end it. And I'm inviting you to the next space as well, man. Would love you to come up on the panel. Everybody, if you're not on your phone right now, if you're doing the laundry, going for a run, take a pause, go on your phone, go on my profile, set your reminders for the last 2 spaces. And I'll give the mic to Tara to wrap up the space for us, as always. Tara, are you with us? I'll do it for you, Tara. Appreciate you all for coming. Set your reminders. I'll see you tomorrow for the chat we're going to have with Mark Andreessen. Should be a really interesting one. And any questions you have for him, you can put them in the post for that space. And make sure you set your reminders. And then we'll see you the day after that for the big COVID debate. Pretty tricky territory. Love you all. Thank you so much. Tom, really appreciate you co-hosting with us today. Tara, as always. Ian, appreciate you for coming as well. And thanks for all other panelists, Ed, Piotr, Asya, Stephen, Fidgetal. Bye, guys. Thanks, everyone.